Commission for the meeting of March 27th, 2019 to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Chairperson Sadler. Vice Chair Borders.
Here.
Commissioner Doors. Commissioner Eswine. Commissioner Preston. Commissioner Tingle. Commissioner Wiggins. A quorum's present.
Thank you. Commissioner Preston, would you lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Commissioner. Public comment. The public is invited at this time to comment on and discuss any topic that is relevant to or within the authority of the Planning Commission, including any matters that is not specifically included in the agenda as an action item. Do we have any public comment at this time? Would you like to come forward, please?
Are you here on a particular item? Yes, I am.
We will take, we'll take public comment for each item. This is more for if there's, okay? Thank you. Possible approval of minutes, we'll take them one at a time, I guess. First for January minutes, January 30th meeting. Are there any changes or comments on it? If not, I'll have a motion for acceptance of the minutes.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
Ben Johnson from the District Attorney's Office for the record. I
Yes.
just wanted to make a comment for the record on these minutes. NRS requires that minutes be approved within 45 days or at the next meeting, unless good cause is shown. And I just wanted to state for the record that there is good cause for these being presented late due to staffing at the clerk's office. So I just wanted to put that on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Again, any corrections or comments or a motion?
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Borders.
I'll make a motion that we approve the minutes of January 30th, 2018 2019, right? As presented. They say 2018. There's a correction for you.
We have a motion, we have a second.
I second.
Commissioner Tingle seconds, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Now, the minutes for February's meeting, February 27th of 2019. Again, there's a correction there. That's the only one I see. Any corrections or comments?
Mr. Chairman, I have a correction on
Yes.
page 6, on the approval. I believe I was present for the approval of that, and I'm not showing up.
Okay. We'll see that correction.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other corrections? If not, a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we accept the minutes of February 27th.
We have a motion by Commissioner Eswine, a second. Second, Commissioner Doors. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. Save those. Moving on, meeting items. SUP-18-178 for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a special use permit for 8 apartment buildings with 143 total combined units on property located within the retail commercial zoning district 4530 and 4580 Cochise Street, APNs 009265-01, -02, -03, 009287-06, and 07. Hope.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The applicant is proposing a 143-unit apartment complex that would consist of 27 one-bedroom units, 100 two-bedroom units, and 16 three-bedroom units. Buildings are proposed to be 3 stories with an overall height of 35 feet. I'll note that in the zoning district, a height of 45 feet would be allowed. Building materials will be stucco with a 6-inch horizontal cement fiber siding. The applicant is proposing 76 garages, 196 surface parking spaces, a clubhouse, a swimming pool, and a pathway system. With the parking proposed by the applicant, he'll yield 1.9 parking spaces per unit. The code requires 2 parking spaces per unit, but the code also says that you can utilize another expert source to determine the parking standard, and the Institute of Transportation Engineers provides the 1.9 is consistent with the Institute of Transportation Engineers. I believe their number is 1.7 per unit. The applicant is proposing 1.94 acres of open space where 0.82 acres is required. The property consists of 6.67 acres, which is comprised of 5 lots and a portion of Willow Street. This project will rely on the Board of Supervisors abandoning Willow Street, and there's a condition of approval that the applicant must obtain board approval of the abandonment of Willow Street in order for this SUP to be effective. Access to the site is proposed from Cochise Street and West Overland Street. The applicant is proposing landscaping along Cochise Street frontage that will mirror the landscaping on the east side of that roadway, utilizing the same tree layout with the evergreen trees to frame the driveway access point. So if you were able to visit the site and see those trees on the east side of Cochise, I think that's a really nice statement, and to mirror that on the west side is really going to make that a pretty entry. As the zoning is retail commercial, the multifamily use can only be established subject to a special use permit. As this commission knows, a special use permit will require a majority of the planning commission making the 7 required findings of fact in the affirmative. In my presentation, I'm going to focus on 3 of the findings. Finding number 2, neighborhood compatibility. Finding number 3, the effect on vehicular and pedestrian traffic. And finding number 4, public services and facilities. In terms of neighborhood compatibility, the property is adjacent to single-family residential on the west side and on the south side. I will note, and if you visit the site, you observe this, on the west side, there's a significant slope differential when you go towards Voltaire. There's also a street there. So I think with the significant slope differential in the street, you have a de facto separation by just the natural features of the land. To the south, there are 4 single-family homes adjacent to the property line. The applicant is proposing a 4-foot screen wall with landscape screening along that property line. Staff is recommending, just to reinforce this and to address a timing element as well, that there be a condition of approval that a detailed landscape plan for the southern property line demonstrating a 6-foot solid wall and dense landscaping that will reach a maturity height of 6 feet be submitted as part of the site improvement permit. This improvement must be constructed as part of the site improvements and must be completely installed prior to a certificate of occupancy of on the first building. This way, that barrier, if you will, between the subject property and the 4 homes to the south will be in place before the apartments are occupied. As designed, the balconies are proposed on the east and the west facades, so the homes to the south will not have residents looking in their yards. Per the city development standards, due to the proximity to the residential properties, lighting heights are limited to a height of 12 feet and must be directed downward. To further ensure that the lighting doesn't become some type of nuisance to the neighboring residential properties, the staff has included a condition of approval requiring a photometric survey. A photometric survey is a survey that shows, based on the light placement, where the lighting will spill. The goal is to not have spillover lighting in the residential areas. So with these conditions, the staff believes that finding number 2 concerning neighborhood compatibility can be met. In terms of finding 3, vehicular and pedestrian traffic, the applicant did provide a traffic analysis that's anticipating 902 average weekday trips, with 56 trips occurring in the AM peak and 74 trips occurring in the PM peak. The traffic analysis recommends the following 2 mitigations. Construction of an all-way stop controls at Cochise and Appian intersection prior to the first certificate of occupancy, and to stripe a crosswalk at the south leg of Cochise and Overland intersection to increase the pedestrian safety to and from the project prior to the first CO. So these improvements would be in place prior to any occupancy of any buildings. The traffic impact analysis also concludes that the northbound left turn movements across Carson Street at Overland and Appian Way are anticipated to degrade to poor levels of service E and F, under the 2040 baseline, and a future signal may be required at Carson Street and at the intersection of Carson Street and Appian Way. Staff has included a condition that the applicant pay its pro rata share towards the cost of that signal. You did receive late material from the applicant questioning the numbers that were in the original condition of approval, which is condition number 15. The staff, we heard what the applicant said, and to a certain extent, we agree with the applicant. If we consider background traffic, the original condition was based on the warrant. What would cause a warrant for a traffic light? The 2.5 recognizes the total traffic that utilizes that intersection, not just the traffic that would cause the need for a traffic light. And looking at the total traffic, which includes background traffic, this use would contribute 2.5%. So staff is recommending a modification to condition 15 that says prior to issuance of a construction permit, and I do have it on the board for you, it's not in your materials. The applicant shall enter into an improvement agreement to pay 2.5% of the cost required to install a traffic control signal/device, which I'll speak more specifically to that in a minute, at the South Carson Street Appian Way, it should say intersection, in an amount not to exceed $30,000. The surety for this agreement must be in the form of cash and shall be used by the city to pay for the design/construction of a traffic control signal/device, or held for a period of no more than 10 years. We'll change that, no more than 10 years. If the funds are not utilized for said traffic control signal/device within 10 years, the funds shall be released. If 2.5% of the cost of the improvement is less than $30,000, the difference shall be reimbursed. The applicant has questioned the dollar amount. Our public works staff, who's experienced in public works improvements, has estimated a cost of $1.2 million, and the staff wants to hold to that number. That's based on experienced personnel over at our public works department. But we do recognize by no means do we want to over-collect the money. We just want a fair share is what we're recommending, which is why we specifically call out the reimbursement if it comes in at a lower cost. The reference to a device is in case the solution is a traffic circle as opposed to a traffic light. We want to build into the condition that flexibility. So what this condition does is if this condition is approved, then it creates the framework for a future agreement. The details are in the agreement. This creates the framework that the agreement would then implement. And the agreement would identify the 2.5%, the $30,000, and it could better define what the traffic device would be, should it be an alternative to a signal. It would also spell out very specifically the reimbursement if the cost of 2.5% of the improvements came in at less than $30,000. So for the benefit of the record, I wanted to go into that very specifically because there were questions about what is a traffic control device, and just to be honest with you, I was thinking if it was a circle instead of a traffic light. Lucia Maloney and Dan Stuckey are joining me and Stephen Pote tonight, so if you have any really specific questions about the traffic, they're prepared to speak to that. In terms of condition 4, public services and facilities, you received correspondence regarding crime. So I met with the sheriff's office. The top 5 places where the sheriff gets calls right now are all non-residential properties. Their top 2 calls, the first one is for welfare checks, and the second one is for suspicious vehicles. So I just thought that was interesting, and I'd share it with you. They have indicated they do have the capacity to serve this project, should it be approved, and they're not concerned with their ability to service this project. I also included in your packet an email from the school. It was part of the late material. You'll see that they indicate they always have a concern about additional students in the schools, but they have not proposed any mitigations. So the staff with the additional information continues to conclude that the proposed project will not overburden public services and facilities, and the staff is making finding number 4 in the affirmative. So based on the ability to make the 7 required findings of fact in the affirmative, the staff is recommending approval of this project, subject to the conditions of approval. I'm happy to answer any other questions, and Randy Walter is here representing the applicant.
Thank you, Hope. Questions for staff? Commissioner Doors?
Commissioner Doors for the record. There is, the second part from Mr. Koronek is, and they'd be concerned with safe bus stop areas. Is there something addressing bus stop areas or changing that in any way?
Well, we can certainly do, and I'll check the conditions. I can't remember if I put in the conditions of approval. I think I did not. But I can add a condition that would say, as part of the site improvement permit review, we will consult with the school district to determine if accommodations for a school bus should be incorporated into the design.
Thank you.
As far as parking goes, there's 143 units, and so if each unit had 2 cars, that's 286 parking places. Is there any control or anything about additional, say someone has a trailer, motor home, something like that, for where they'd be able to park it, or whether it would be on site or whatever, you know?
I have not addressed that in the staff report. We haven't really come across that, to the best of my knowledge, but you may have different experience with that with other apartments. Randy may be able to speak to whether or not there will be controls put in place by the property owner regarding storage of those type of vehicles.
And in the letter we got also mentions about noise and dogs, et cetera, et cetera. Where the houses are,
That's different.
oh, okay. Where the houses are, the ends of the buildings are there, correct?
That is correct. So the balconies face in an east-west
Right.
position.
Okay.
And I'm glad you just mentioned the dogs, because there was correspondence that talked about the need for a park and a dog park and
Right.
things like that. I did talk to the Parks and Rec staff about that, and they did review the letter. They indicated we do have, is it Fuji Park has a dog park, and that is nearby, just south of Costco. And that's a regional amenity, as is Ross Gold Park, which is across Carson Street over by off Schneider. And so they feel like there are amenities, plus this project or this development will accommodate recreational facilities on site to meet the needs of its residents, including the clubhouse, the swimming pool. And there's a condition of approval that the recreational programming will be subject to review by our Parks and Rec Department to ensure that it includes enough recreational amenities to meet the needs of the residents. So the Parks and Rec Department did not feel that there should be a public park as part of this proposal.
And again, the fact that the ends of the buildings are kind of there, that's not going to be probably much people using those side yards between the houses and the apartments, I wouldn't think, or there wouldn't be dog areas out in that area or whatever anyway, correct?
Right, if you look at the site plan,
Right.
what's in the middle is the swimming pool, the recreational area, and there's a building, a clubhouse in there. So they've really internalized those facilities. They do have some parking over there, but they also are proposing, again, the solid wall and the 6-foot landscaping, which they'll be together. It's not one or the other, it's both. So that will help create a physical barrier between, along that property line.
Thank you. Other questions for staff? Commissioner Tingle?
So as far as guest parking, you were talking about 1.9 parking spots per apartment. Is there any guest parking that's being talked about or set aside in the event that somebody might have somebody come by?
In terms of guest parking, the requirement for an apartment complex is 2 spaces per unit. Guest parking on site is required when the streets abutting the project cannot accommodate on-street parking. Cochise does have on-street parking. Overland will be improved. Right now, I'm going to say Overland, based on its current improvements, would not accommodate on-street parking. Once it's improved, I'm not sure. We'll check. But for sure, Cochise has on-street parking. So since the adjacent street has on-street parking, the requirement is 2, and they don't have to have extra guest parking on site.
Other questions for staff?
Just one.
Commissioner Borders?
Is this gated at all?
Not to my knowledge, but I'll let the applicant speak to that.
I would like to acknowledge too that I appreciate the letter from the school district. I know we've been contacting them and often we haven't heard, but it's nice to see they responded. I just wanted to make sure that was on the record. Commissioner Borders? Doors, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Doors for the record. I guess maybe this is a stretch, but has there been any thought or discussion about, in regards to the bus stops and kind of tying them into the traffic device or traffic signal? It seems like the traffic signal would greatly benefit a bus stop wherever it is, which in turn would kind of mess up the whole percentages that has come from this consulting services places. Has there been any thought about that, or I'm just kind of thinking about that, in terms of them lowering from 7 to 2.5% responsibility or culpability or whatever?
I guess the question is, does the traffic impact analysis contemplate putting in a bus stop and a reduction in trips based on the presence of a bus stop and the availability of buses? Is that sort of the question?
Yes, and what that impact would have on the need for a traffic device.
Lucia Maloney's here. I'm just going to take a quick stab at it, then I'll turn it over to her. When you look at trip generation, you look at urban areas, suburban areas, and more rural areas. And I would assume, and Lucia, I hope I'm not messing you up here, but that it takes into account the availability of public transportation based on the type of community it is, but I'll turn it over.
Hope this is not a public transportation bus stop. We're talking about a place for the school bus to stop.
Yes.
And
So
what
the
I would,
question, I'm sorry,
I
I
would-
thought you were talking about public transportation.
what I would think is that the school bus will just come into the area and pick everybody up at the,
Not gated.
if it is or if it isn't gated, they'd pick all the kids up in one location.
So the question is, will the school bus reduce the traffic count?
No. Okay, so I'll kind of start at the yeah, all right. I'll start at the beginning of my thought process because I'm thinking of it up here, so I didn't really articulate it very well. The main concern that bothers me with Mr. Korenek's email is, he's concerned with safe bus stop areas. I didn't even think about the fact that maybe they'll pull into the complex. Maybe that solves everything. What I'm thinking about is where they would be stopping on the streets and how that might increase the need for a traffic signal, thus messing up the whole email about, well, we're only responsible for 2.5%, if really that school bus, in my mind, could be responsible for much more need for a traffic signal, I guess. So I'm just kind of really ultimately trying to figure out where I stand with the email requesting the drop to 2.5%.
Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. I may or may not answer this correctly, so please correct me if I misspeak. Somewhere in here, I was looking, trying to find a specific page for you, but with every development, we ask the developer, the traffic engineers to look at, what types of trips are being developed or generated from the project. So somewhere in here, and I apologize, I'm having trouble finding it at the moment, it talks about how many school-age trips are intended to be generated from this project. And so they do look at those school-age trips. In terms of specifically providing a space for a school bus, I didn't see anything in the traffic impact study specifically related to school buses, but I can say with any sort of civic amenity or requirement such as a school bus or even a transit bus, we need to look at circulation, of which a traffic signal would certainly help with circulation getting in and out.
That was exactly the answer I was looking for. Thank you.
Other questions for staff? Okay. Seeing none, would the applicant come forward, please? You'd state your name for us, please, and
Is this on? Okay. Can you hear me now? How's that? Is that better? It's okay? Closer? How's that? Okay. For the record, my name is Randy Walter. I'm with Places Consulting Services. I'm here representing the current property owners, which are Steve Doncho and Bob French. This special use permit application is based on quite a bit of work and negotiations and talking with staff and trying to address all the concerns that have been raised throughout the review of this project. As some of you may remember, we had a zone change request a few months back, talked about several of these issues in the past. One of the things that came out of it was a revision to the traffic report that was intended to deal with some other issues beyond just the issues of this project. So when I get to that, I'll kind of point that out to you. To talk about the school bus issue, number one, the number of students in a typical apartment complex is typically not that high in comparison to a single-family project or some other type of residential units. However, this project is set up so if there was a significant number, at least some number that the school bus would need to pick up, it would be very easy for them to come in, for instance, on the Overland entrance, stop at the community center, pick up whatever kids are there, and exit out Cochise. That bus route, if that's something that works for the school district, which I don't really know and not, I'm just supposing at this point, would enable the project to work and function very well. The concern about the traffic signal percentage of contribution from this project, I'll get to in more detail when we get there. But the real key movement in that intersection, that is the one that's causing the intersection itself to fall below acceptable levels, is the left turn in from the south. So it's really a northbound left turn in that's creating the current problem without the signal. So I don't know how many school buses are coming from the south, but my guess is probably not too many. I'd like to just emphasize a couple of the findings. I think Hope's done an excellent job of summarizing the project, in particular the issues with the findings and some of the things we've been through in the past. Finding number one under special use permits talks about encouraging compact development and mixed-use activity centers. This project obviously has a fairly significant density component to it, which encourages more compact development. I'm going to try and see if I can, there it is. I'm trying to get it to go forward. There, finally. Okay. Maybe I'll just use a pointer to be easier. The mixed-use component of it, I think, is one of the more unique aspects of this particular site in this particular neighborhood. There's a significant amount of mixed-use facilities well within walking distance of this site. That really encourages the ability to not create more trips than necessary, because people can actually, they can walk to the store, they can walk to the movies, they can walk to other entertainment, they can walk to other services that are available, medical facilities are available. It's a very unique mixed-use community in and of itself. Adding residential is, both this project is one that, as well as one to the north, that residential component will both help and enforce that mixed-use component, and we'll probably see more services provided because of that. So I think that's an important component for these finding 4 as well as finding B. Let's see, I'll do this, I think. No, I guess I won't do that. Come on. No. Me and technology don't get along real well. Finding number 4 talks about overburdening existing public facilities and services. Hope covered several of those. I'd like to cover some more of the specific site components, some of the improvements that'll be made that'll benefit not only this project, but the community as a whole. There is an existing two water systems, one in the Cochise zone and one in the Voltaire zone. They're not really connected at this point. We'll connect those two services with a pressure regulating valve so that we can maintain reliability on both of those systems by being able to interconnect as well as providing additional water services for this project. Storm drain will ultimately come down through Cochise, go to Appian Way and to the drainage facility that NDOT had built as a function of their improvements on that area, which was designed for this project and several others in this area. And we'll work with the city on that joint project to make sure that that storm drain operates not only for this project, but other projects in the future. The street improvements include half-street improvements on Cochise, half-street improvements on Overland, and half-street improvements on Voltaire, which also includes sidewalks and sidewalk connections. That'll make a big difference in the physical ability for people to circulate in that community with those improvements in place. Gee, it went by itself. Okay. Some of the improvements that we're talking about help to mitigate some of the impacts that this project can have, particularly on the single family to the south. I know this was discussed a lot during the zone change request, and so we took that as a direction to try to come up with a system that would work effectively to screen and minimize any impacts on those residential projects. The screening that we'll be putting on the south property line includes the 6-foot wall that Hope has already mentioned, as well as a landscaping component that'll be primarily conifer trees, so that we have a continuous screen of the project from the residential. She also mentioned the orientation of the buildings. We've also limited pretty much the access and circulation around those buildings to just really fire access, quite frankly, and parking that people typically won't use because it's not located next to their access to their units. So we've done the best we can to minimize the impact on that single-family residential from a design perspective, and we think it'll be a very compatible project to those folks. As you know, ultimately, those houses will ultimately become something other than single-family. There'll be some kind of commercial uses there eventually, but the screen will still be in place. Another thing that Hope mentioned, which is part of finding number 2, we tried to make sure that this project blended into the neighborhood as best as it could. The existing landscaping that's on the south side of Cochise, that's in that commercial project, has kind of a rhythm to it. There's a lot of vertical conifers as well as at the intersections, as well as columnar trees that create kind of an interesting rhythm within that component. We're going to try to duplicate that on our side, have the same kind of evergreen trees to frame the entrances, as well as the vertical tree canopy that's created as a function of what we're doing. The third thing that we're doing on that edge is we're creating a hedge buffer at the top to kind of screen that single row of parking that's up against Cochise. We don't really want to necessarily have people being able to see that parking area, so that hedge treatment will help minimize any visual impact from people walking, biking, driving on Cochise of that parking area. They really won't see it. So that's kind of another component from the design standpoint. It works. The other finding is finding number 3, and Hope spent quite a bit of time talking about. I just want to emphasize a couple of things. The finding says we will have little or no detrimental effects on vehicular pedestrian traffic within the neighborhood. When we redid the traffic study, we looked at some additional intersections that weren't part of the original traffic study, primarily on Carson Street. We looked at Clearview, Overland, as well as Appian and Carson Street. Those 3 intersections were not part of the original traffic study, but we did look at them this time. The other thing we did is we added all the projects that you folks have seen over the past year or so that have also come up before you, and added that traffic into the model, because the model that was used originally in the existing model doesn't have those traffic trips in it. We've added those traffic trips in it, took the background traffic and extended it to 2040. So that you have a concept of what all of those projects, if they were all built, would impact the traffic control devices that are currently there. These are the projects that are included in the revised traffic study. It includes Clearview Ridge, which is a residential project just north of this project, our project, Cochise, the RC zoning, which just occurred not too long ago, which was originally a hotel, as presented to you. Appian Commercial, which is the Chick-fil-A piece, as well as there's a little commercial pad that's on Appian Way that's not part of that other facility. So we added all those projects into it, added the background traffic and just growth in traffic in general, and then moved forward with the traffic analysis that was done. My traffic engineer's not here, so I'm going to pretend like I know what I'm talking about when I really don't. I'll just go what he's told me so we can kind of move on. The interesting part about all of that traffic being added together and going to 2040, the overwhelming majority of the movements and intersections within this area stay at level of service A, B, or C, which is very adequate levels of service. There's only 3 different areas that there's some consideration that we need to look at for future improvements. One of them is the intersection of Cochise and Appian Way. Currently, it's a two-stop, it's a one stop from 2 directions, but it's a through street in the other 2 directions. As time goes on and as all these projects add their trips to it, that intersection no longer functions effectively and it falls to level of service E or F. The other 2 intersections we've already talked about, which is the Carson Overland and Carson Appian Way intersections where that northbound left turn movement causes those intersections to fall to below adequate levels of service. The location of the Appian intersection from a signalized location or signal position works better with existing signals that are already on Carson Street and works better from a spacing standpoint. So that's really the intersection that needs to have the improvement, which is where we've come up with condition 15 for the traffic signal. Now, keep in mind that what's interesting about this traffic analysis is with or without this project, those improvements are still necessary. This project creates a very small amount of movements on those 3 intersections that have an impact. So one of the things that we did is we looked at the intersection of Cochise and Appian. It's one of the stop signs that are there now. Because of some of the storm drain improvements and some of the other work that'll be done there, it makes sense for us to actually look at creating that 4-way stop intersection at that location, and that's one of the conditions of approval of the project. That 4-way stop intersection then changes the level of service to level of service B at that intersection by just making it a 4-way stop. So we just included that as part of what would be good for the neighborhood in general. The signal intersection at Carson and Appian has a level of service F because of that northbound left turn lane. So it clearly needs to have a signalization or some type of improvement, as Hope mentioned, it could be a traffic circle as well. The traffic movements that are there projected to 2040, just to give you an idea. That left turn movement, I can't read these numbers, and I'm sure you can't, so I'm going to try to give you a better idea what they are. The slide that's up shows the 2040 baseline condition. Basically, that's the project traffic as well as the increase in traffic over the time span. That left turn movement in the PM is 258 left turn movements. In the AM is 302 movements. That's a lot of left turn movements at an intersection that's not controlled at this point. Clearly, a signal is required at that intersection to meet that demand. Of that, this project has 12 PM peak movements and 3 AM. So it's a relatively small number in comparison to the overall trip generation. This is the condition we talked about. I'll just go past it because I think we're in agreement with that, the new condition. I thought it'd be good to kind of point out again how this project fits into the overall scheme of things relative to the overall growth and traffic that'll occur in this neighborhood. The Cochise apartment complex has basically a total of 33 movements through this intersection that we're talking about at Appian and Carson Street. That's in comparison to the total trips, which is 1,300. So it'll give you an idea of magnitude of difference between the number of trips going through that intersection versus what this project generates. If you look at the 2.5%, that's how the 2.5% is calculated. It's based on that relationship. Many of these other projects, such as the commercial project, has upwards of 40% of those trips and would have a proportionate share of 40% contribution to the improvements in that intersection. So that'll kind of give you an overview of that component of it. In conclusion, we concur with the staff recommendations, the staff report as it's been amended, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. We would like to request your approval of the project as presented.
So I was going to ask that you do agree then with the amended 15 with all 35 of the recommendations?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Questions for Commissioner Tingle?
So in your binder that you supplied, there is a section called Market Need. And this proposed project is intended to serve the growing need for more affordable workforce housing. So how is this determined, and what are you going to do to guarantee that once developed, this will be the case? Because there is definitely a lack of workforce housing, and I guess prior to explaining any of that, what are you looking at as the definition of workforce housing?
Well, as you probably know, Commissioner, there's a lot of definitions for workforce housing and affordability, and all of those things all have interesting definitions. The intent of this project is to provide a housing type, which is apartments, that fits the mold of more affordable places to live for folks. Not single family, it's not large lot, it's those kinds of things that tend to increase costs significantly. So the component that we're really looking at is the housing type itself, which is the apartment complex itself, the density of the apartment complex, and the ability to develop this project relatively economically from the standpoint of an actual development project. With the exception of the grading that's on this project, most of it's pretty feasible economically to produce a good quality apartment living community that would provide for lower cost to the homeowner, or to the people that are living there. That's really what the intent is. It doesn't have any percentage of median income or any of those types of things that you're familiar with from the standpoint of definition. It's really more the housing type that we're talking about, and providing that as an alternative to other housing types that are being built.
Okay, so I guess the reason I asked this question is I have people who work for me who can't afford to live here in Carson City, who are making above minimum wage. And so if you are talking about workforce housing, I'm wondering which workforce you are referring to, because if it's workforce that are actually making above minimum wage, and they might be making $50,000 a year, $50,000 a year, they still can't afford housing in this town. So when you're talking affordable workforce housing, I just would like a little more of a definitive description of that. And I know there are, multiple variations of that. But when I look at it from a logistical standpoint, from people who work for me and they're struggling and they're making decent money above minimum wage, and they still can't afford a $1,200 a month apartment rent, which is just under my house payment. So I'm kind of questioning what that exactly looks like.
And I think from the property owner standpoint, from the future developer standpoint, the goal is to try to meet an affordable level of housing that'll work for everybody, and particularly work for folks that you're talking about that are in that price range. It would be nice to have apartments available at under $1,000 a unit, for instance. That would certainly help a lot of folks in that price range. That's, I think, one of the goals of the project from a practical standpoint. How it actually ends up, I don't know that. We haven't got a lot of the details in terms of actual construction costs, et cetera, that are associated with it, but that's certainly the goal. I'd like to be able to give you a real hard and fast number of how these things would be, but we don't really know that at this point.
I would like you to be able to do that too, but in lieu of that, you had made a comment about there's an intersection that already doesn't meet the level of service, that doesn't have any kind of traffic control device. So,
Cochise and Appian Way.
yeah, what is the reason that we are not already looking at putting in a traffic control device, regardless of whether or not your development is approved, because there's already been a bunch of development approved up in that area, which is going to impact the level of service, the ability to get around from point A to point B. And if this doesn't already have a traffic control device, the question is why? And I know it's not your question. It's
It's something you can talk to staff about. Quite frankly, the existing intersection that's there and what's currently installed probably works effectively for what's currently there from a volume standpoint. It's what happens when we start adding all these projects into it that creates that problem. Currently, it doesn't operate at a very bad level of service at all because there's very little traffic in that location. However, when you start adding all these other commercial components, that changes it significantly. And we feel it's important to try to do what we can do as a function of what we're doing to improve that intersection and make it work effectively for the community.
Okay, I must have misunderstood your comment then. If the intersection already doesn't meet the level, because that was a comment you made that it didn't, and so,
I think what he was saying too is by putting it to a four-way, by putting it to a four-way would solve it going from this level to that level, would solve the problem initially.
currently.
Currently, right. Other questions for the applicant?
I have a question, a couple of questions, actually. How high, what's the elevation difference between Cochise and the parking level at the facility?
Good question. It actually varies from north to south. On the north side, for instance, the elevation of Cochise versus where the parking and access to the garages will be is actually a little lower. It's only a few feet, but it is lower. As you go to the south, the site goes significantly above Cochise. I could go back to the slide and show you the difference, but it's close to 15 feet of difference in elevation as you get to the far south end.
So what's that gonna do to your entry on Cochise?
Yeah, the entry
That's gonna be a pretty steep grade there.
The entry of Cochise is about a 5% grade as you come off of Cochise into the project.
Okay.
In order to get circulation all the way to the west side of this project and meet all the requirements, we've got a 5% driveway basically that runs the entire east-west corridor up that project in order to give access to all of these parking areas and garages.
So will these buildings be tiered
Yes.
on the site?
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the components of the design of the units. I didn't happen to bring a slide of the units with me, but I'll try to describe it if I can. The lower level is the garage entrances. That's only half of the lower level. The other half is actually underground because the slope then, the property then slopes underneath it and creates the second level. The second level to the rear or the west side is actually the first level at that point. There's only 2 stories in the back and 3 stories in the front of each of these buildings. So they step all the way up that way.
Okay. Another question I had is, there's a stone retaining wall at the back on the west side of the site below Voltaire. Will you be retaining that? It's a pretty nice piece of work.
Of stonework?
Yeah.
My guess is we won't be able to simply because the right-of-way for Voltaire to build half-street improvements is going to extend significantly over that existing grade that's there currently. As it stands right now, the street that you see of Voltaire, which you drive on up there right now, is really in the middle of the right-of-way, and there's a whole nother 20 or 30 feet to the east of that that's right-of-way.
Okay.
So that'll all have to be modified significantly to make that work.
Okay. and
I'd
then,
like to see if we could retain that rockery wall. I've looked at it, I've seen it, but from a distance, I haven't looked very closely at it.
and one other comment or question. Oh, yeah, on the south side, the landscape improvements, I would suggest that rather than just saying mature height of 6 feet, that the trees be staggered so that there's, some variation there to better screen the site from the neighboring properties.
Commissioner, that would certainly be our choice. We would plant evergreen trees that are a variety of heights in that backside, including higher, taller trees that will have a tendency to go taller as time goes on. You want to create more of a naturalistic approach. You don't want everything to be the same height.
And I would like to see the condition then modified to just specify that it would be a staggered rather than maximum height of 6 feet or a height of 6 feet.
Sure, and I think that's acceptable from our standpoint.
Was that a height of 6 feet at the planting, or is it a max? Oh, a mature, I didn't pick that up, okay.
I think that's looking more at it from a shrub standpoint rather than a tree standpoint, and we do both.
Questions for the applicant?
One more.
Commissioner Borders?
Is it gated?
It hasn't even been contemplated to be gated, no, sir.
Would your client be okay with adding the condition that if so needed by the city, that you guys either build or mark off a specific area for a bus stop within the actual project itself?
I don't think that's a problem. I'm looking at my owner. I don't think that's a problem at all. It would actually be not only a more safe location for just the bus itself, but from the children's standpoint and the parents, it's a more controlled environment than it would be on the street.
And that, to kind of speak to my earlier point, that is really my ultimate concern, is not so much traffic or trips, it is congested traffic around children and parents and stuff.
Yes, and we would agree that it would be much nicer to be able to do that on site.
To clarify, that would be a school bus stop, not a city transit or whatever.
Correct, a
Just
school bus stop,
coordinated with the schools, whatever works best for them and the project.
exactly.
Okay. Other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Seeing none, we'll open it up for the public. Any comments from the public? Please feel free to come forward and state your name, if you would. Do you want them to record as well? If you would, just write your name down and. Go ahead and sit, if you would, sit down, please, ma'am. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Darlene Branton. I live on Clearview. And I'm here tonight because I have several concerns about this project. One is safety. I know that you've discussed safety and traffic, but I would like to know specifically about fire access and safety around this project. Is there access for fire vehicles?
Just to clarify, as we get into this, you'll ask your questions, and then either staff or the applicant or whatever will respond
Okay,
afterwards. if you
I'll
could.
list those questions then. One is safety for fire access. To expansion of overland, I don't know how wide you're going to make overland, but you've got traffic from the church at that little strip mall there, Common Grounds Church, which has traffic on both sides of the street every Sunday for several hours, which does not allow a lot of traffic to come up and down that street on either side, nor are the sidelines clear with that traffic. So that is a condition that I'm very concerned about. And I don't know what a half-street improvement is. Maybe someone could tell me what a half-street improvement is. Is there also going to be a left turn lane onto Overland? In my opinion, I believe that it would be beneficial for a light to be placed at Carson and Appian and a roundabout instead of a four-way stop at the Appian-Cochise area. So that's about all I have to say at this point. Thank you. Okay.
Okay. I'm Tony Pilot. resident of Carson City, probably 100 yards from this property. Been there 20-plus years. Okay. I have some points, but before I forget, let's talk about Cochise. You're talking about using Cochise for guest parking. Cochise is a two-lane street, and it's quite busy. Curry turns into Cochise. And people use that back route to bypass all the lights on Carson Street. So if you park on a two-lane busy street, you're going to have trouble. You're going to have trouble with first responders. The fire trucks are big. You know, we get a lot of fires back there. Every year we get fires, it seems. Well, waterfall fires started back there. You got to have room for those first responder vehicles. So that's the first thing I'd say. And then here, right now the school bus pulls over on the easement. There's a school bus that stops every day. They pull over on the easement, but it looks like you're going to take the easement. Is that your intention? Okay, so there's that. It looks like the available parking for the bus is actually less. So I would strictly advise against parking on Cochise. That's just dangerous. Okay, now, to me, I don't see any open space. I see apartments and parking. To me, open space is a place to take your dog, walk your dog, throw a ball. There's none of that. I don't see any of that. I think this design's one of the better ones I've seen for the area, and I think you'll try to do a good job. I love my city. I think my city's beautiful, and I appreciate the effort that goes into keeping it beautiful. I really do. But you've got to have a place for people to go, something to do, a place to walk your dog, place to throw a ball. This is pavement and apartments. Another thing I'll say is we get flooding through there. So the perk rate for the ground is quite high. It absorbs water quickly. And what you're doing is replacing a sponge with a sheet of concrete. And that water's just going to run right off onto Cochise streets. What's going to happen? So if you've got good flood control, you're set. But I would expect heavy water through there. All right, so that said, parking. I looked at the numbers, and they've got parking spaces, and some of the units have garages, and it sounds nice. And I figure they're going to have about 300 parking places. And I did the same math. I said 2 per unit, 286 parking spots are needed. So you've got enough until guest parking. And there's no guest parking, from what I understand. There's no guest parking? Okay, what about staff parking? You need parking for the people who work there. And if you've got a clubhouse, I assume people work there. And if you've got a swimming pool, I assume there are lifeguards. So those people have to have a place to park also. So it's just something to keep in mind. As far as the impact on the schools, keep in mind, this is not the only thing being built in the area. This is simply one more project that will have an impact on the schools. Between Kuntz, where the Fandango project is, to Appion, we're adding about 560 units. Now, if you take that as couples and families and so forth, that's going to be an impact of about 1,500 people if it's full. That will have an impact on the schools. We have to think about it. We have to think about how many policemen we need. We know that crime goes up as density goes up. We have to think about our firefighters. We have to think about all these things, social infrastructure. All these things need some thought. So that's about all I had to say. Again, I appreciate what you guys do. I love my city. And I'm not trying to give anybody a hard time. I know they're going to build things there, but we want to build it nice. We want to build it pretty. We want it to be nice. I mean, on the east side of Carson, there's a number of small parks, and it makes all the difference in the world. And the density is much less than what you're proposing for the west side of Carson. So some green space would be very much appreciated. And again, I thank you very much. That's all I had to say.
More public comment? Okay, seeing none, bring it back. Staff, you want to address some of those, or?
Okay, sure. There was a question about fire access. These plans were routed to the fire department, and the commission has in their packet the comments of the fire department. Because the fire department's requirements are code-related, they don't get incorporated into the conditions of approval because you just have to do them. But you'll see, if you look at the comments, they address hydrant spacing. Had there been an issue with turning radii or with building access, we would have read that. We don't read that. What we read is that the project has to comply with the 2018 International Fire Code and Northern Nevada Fire Code amendments. And there's some comments about the hydrant spacing and that you need to be within, they need a FDC within 100 feet of the fire hydrant, but there were no concerns about access. And in fact, in the past, when I have had projects where the fire department has identified access concerns or turning radii concerns, I have held that project back before bringing it forward to a public meeting because of the level of redesign that's necessary to make sure it's going to meet fire code. In terms of expansion of Overland, I'll point out to the commission, condition number 12, which Stephen can help me explain, but I'll just read it to you. It says that half-street improvements will be required along West Overland frontage and Voltaire Street frontage to meet the standard detail for a roadway section urban streets. Street improvements along the Cochise frontage will be required to meet the standard detail for a 3-lane urban collector with a center turn lane, bike lanes, and no parking. The no parking would be on the west side of the street. The east side of the street does have parking. So I'll have Stephen explain what a half-street improvement is, but I think that addresses the left turn onto Overland from Cochise. And in terms of let's see, the bus parking, I think we've talked about that, and I'm going to be recommending to the commission that the condition read, as part of the site improvement permit, the applicant shall consult with the school district regarding incorporation of a bus stop. On the open space, condition number 5, requires an exhibit demonstrating compliance with the open space requirement, and an exhibit indicating programming of open space areas shall be included in the application for a site improvement permit. The on-site programming must be designed to meet the needs of the residents. So what might be slightly misleading is up to 100 square feet per unit may be private open space. These units have balconies. That balcony counts as open space for private open space. Flooding and stormwater is addressed in condition number 25, which states a technical drainage study must be submitted with the site improvement plans. The technical drainage study must give calculations for the sizing of all culverts, storm drains, and riprap. And the comments on school capacity, the commission knows we talk about school capacity every time we look at a residential project. I just want to add, before I turn it over to Stephen to talk about half-street improvements, the staff is very aware that this is suddenly a really, this area of the city is getting a lot of attention right now from developers. And the commission's heard me say in the past, this is an area in transition. It hasn't been developed at a level of intensity because the interchange wasn't there. So the investment wasn't there. Right now, a lot of improvements are necessary to build in here. And so you may have heard some frustration from this applicant. I know I did before the meeting. He was a little nicer at the meeting. But they are frustrated because we are looking at the cumulative impacts of all this development and trying to make this work so that everything functions. So staff absolutely recognizes there's a lot happening here, and by no means are we looking at this project in isolation. We're recognizing it as part of a bigger puzzle, if you will. And with that,
Stephen Potato, Development Engineering. So half-street improvements are required by the development standards, so that's a requirement that we would enforce regardless of a special use permit. And it's literally just constructing half the street to the city standard and going from the center line of the right-of-way, building out. And if there's existing asphalt that's in good condition, they can utilize that. Obviously, there's some asphalt up there that's not in good condition and some that's still in decent condition if you look at Cochise. So
And a couple other, they will be adding sidewalks, et cetera, that aren't there
Correct, yeah, so that
currently, which
includes
should benefit
asphalt.
the area.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
And they had like running it by the fire department, hope they also, this all went by Parks and Rec as well. And they've made recommendations as far as bike paths and other things that be incorporated with it, et cetera. So it's gone through all the areas it needs to go through.
I have Commissioner Doors for the record. I have a question regarding the parks. It doesn't really impact a vote on this, but is there no access to the open space to the west of, the mountain range to the west? Is there no legal public access there?
actually, Carson Hill's apartment may have come before you joined the commission. But as part of the conditions of approval with Carson Hills Apartments, there were accesses, they had to include public access easements to ensure that they were not blocking any public access to that public land that's out there just west of Voltaire. They include its signage to direct people, because right now, there's a kind of trailhead, if you will, on, I think it's Cochise and it's not Clearview. What's that street? One north of Clearview, and it kind of just dead ends to a trailhead. Kuntz. And so because their development was going to take away the trailhead, they had to create a different trailhead. So in that case, because it was adjacent to the public lands, we incorporated a lot of conditions to continue that access. This isn't adjacent to public land, so you're not seeing those type of conditions, but my understanding is those lands are available for access, public access.
And we even included in that, they had parking for the people using access inside the development, had to be close enough by to be able to continue to use the trails, et cetera.
All right, the chair is exactly right. Because the trailhead was being removed at Kuntz and Cochise, the applicant was required to provide 5 parking spaces that would be signed for public use for those people utilizing the trail and accessing public lands.
They kind of look at everything. Anyway, further discussion or questions or a motion? Preston.
I have a question first. Did you want to include the change to condition 15?
Yes, what I've heard from the commission is, in addition to what's in the staff report, the following modifications. A modification to condition 15 to read, prior to the issuance of a construction permit, the applicant shall enter into an improvement agreement to pay 2.5% of the cost required to install a traffic control signal/device at South Carson Street/Appian Way in the amount not to exceed $30,000. A surety for this agreement must be in the form of cash and shall be used by the city to pay for the design/construction of a traffic control signal/device or held for a period of no more than 10 years. If the funds are not utilized for said traffic control signal/device within 10 years, funds shall be released. If 2.5% of the cost of the improvement is less than $30,000, the difference shall be reimbursed. Also, a modification I heard from Commissioner Eswine to condition number 7, which I'll read into the record, and he can decide if it captures his thoughts. Condition 7 says, As part of the site improvement permit application, the applicant shall submit a detailed landscape plan demonstrating compliance with both Division 3 and Division 7 of the development standards. The landscape plan shall include a 6-foot solid wall and dense landscaping that will be staggered and of varying heights, with a majority, and I just put this in, having the ability to reach a maturity height of at least 6 feet along the southern property line. The landscape plan shall also include the proposed streetscape design along Cochise. And then an additional condition of approval that reads, as part of the site improvement permit, the applicant will consult with the school district regarding incorporation of a bus stop.
Is that all good with you, sir?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We had closed public comment, but, no, yes? Hard of hearing, so I can't. Go ahead and come forward, sir, if you'd like to make a comment. We'll open it again for a moment, just for this one.
Okay, my name is Mark Butner, and I live on West Patrick Street and Voltaire, and next to where the 110-room hotel's supposedly going to be coming in. So I'm a little familiar with the Planning Commission and the Board of Supervisors. And I just want to say, I've lived there since 1993, and I know all about the traffic in that neighborhood. And I think you're going to have a big problem with Appian and Cochise, because I've told people before, you can make a street wider to accommodate traffic, but it's pretty tough to make an existing street longer. And I think Cochise is about 350 feet long. And it's actually the main access to South Carson Street in that neighborhood. The other one is up to the north at Clearview. And you see a lot of people, and what I'm seeing is as this South Carson project evolves, there's going to be more and more traffic problems on South Carson Street because of the roundabouts, and because if they put in this traffic signal on Appian, it's going to be 5 signals. I think it's a half a mile, which, I mean, that's a lot of traffic control. So what's happening is people that are coming northbound on South Carson Street are swinging to Appian and going down to Cochise, to get to downtown, because there's only 1 or 2 traffic controls between Clearview and downtown. So I think the more and more South Carson Street gets developed, the more and more people are going to want to avoid some of those new developments and want to take Cochise and South Curry. So, good luck. I mean, figuring that one out. And, that's all I really have to say. My main concerns are traffic. I'm a little concerned about, with all the new people, the foot traffic through part of my property, which is an undeveloped part of my property. So I'm a little bit worried about that because it's not fenced yet. So that's all I have to say. Thank you for your time.
So again, we'll bring it back for further discussion or a motion.
Ready.
Commissioner Pressman.
I move to approve SUP 818 -178, based on the ability to make the required findings and subject to the conditions of approval with the amended conditions number 7 and number 15, and the additional consideration of the consulting with the school district regarding a bus stop. Anything else?
Does that cover it? We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I second that.
Commissioner Doers, all in favor? Aye. Opposed?
Nay, I vote nay based on, I don't believe the findings have fully supported finding number 3, 4, 6, and 7.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Doers.
and Stephen, as we go through all this, Hey, do you all have a mechanism to take all these pieces and fold it into the South Carson development as it's going forward, as far as the design goes? You know, I'd hate for those to work not, or independently of each other.
Lucia Maloney, Transportation Manager. I would like to say that I've appreciated hearing the discussion on all this. I don't always attend the Planning Commission meetings, and these discussions on traffic, just to echo what Hope said, they're not in a vacuum. We're not considering each project individually. We are looking at it holistically. Myself and Dan Stuckey, the city engineer, were here tonight, and we lead the South Carson project, and these things will be taken into consideration. Further, I will note that staff have taken a recommendation for what we're calling a South Carson circulation study to be funded by the Redevelopment Authority, the RAC, and that's under consideration in the fiscal year 20 budget to start in July. So what that study would look at is the parallel streets and those side street connections to South Carson to make sure people still can access. And so we hope to consider some of these comments that have been made tonight and further look at those types of things. So we are taking a proactive approach and again, really appreciate the comments.
And we appreciate the applicant actually had built the other units into his traffic, estimates and studies. So they're working, considering all that
Mr.
as well.
Chairman, I would like to register that I voted no on this project.
Oh, you did?
I'm
I
sorry.
didn't hear it.
My concern is until the traffic situation can be adequately identified and plans made to mitigate the congestion, I don't believe that we should be going forward with this project.
All right, so the vote is 5-2 then. Okay, moving on. Public hearing item E2, SUP-19-009, for possible action, discussion and possible action regarding a special use permit to continue the use of an existing billboard located at 3700 Highway 50 East, APN 008-271-04.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the commission knows, special use permits for billboards are good for 5 years, and then they come back to the planning commission for a renewal. The applicant is not proposing any modifications to this billboard. In the staff report, you'll see we've reviewed the development standards for billboards, and this billboard is in compliance with those standards. Because a special use permit is required, you need to be able to make the 7 required findings in the affirmative. The staff report has reviewed each of those findings and made it in the affirmative, and staff is recommending approval subject to the conditions of approval that have been in place on this billboard. Bill Kugler is here to address this as the applicant, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Any questions for staff?
I have one.
Commissioner Borders?
It's my favorite subject. If this billboard were built today and magically appeared, would it comply with the current? I think you said that. I just want to make sure I understood it correctly.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions for staff? Seeing none, any questions for the applicant? Seeing none, okay.
Yes, I reviewed the report and I concur.
Sorry. Mine too.
Yes, I reviewed the report and I concur with it.
Great, thank you, sir. Open it up for public comment on this item, if any. Seeing none, we'll bring it back for
Mr.
just
Chairman,
discussion or a motion. Commissioner Borders?
I'd like to move to approve SUP 19-009 based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff report.
We have a motion from Commissioner Borders. We have a second. Second from Commissioner Eswine. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none. Thank you, sir.
Easy peasy. How long do you think we're gonna take?
This may take a while.
You wanna take a break first? I don't care, I'm okay. All right, yeah,
Move on.
all right.
I need to, I'll get up and go.
Yep.
Moving on, public hearing E3 SUP-19-013 for possible discussion, and possible action regarding a special use permit for a dog boarding facility offering daycare, overnight boarding, and grooming on property located within the retail commercial zoning district, 3101 South Carson Street, APN 009-112-11. Heather?
Thank you. Heather Ferris, Associate Planner for the record. The subject parcel is zoned retail commercial. It's approximately 1/2 acre in size and is surrounded by parcels also zoned retail commercial with single-family residential zoning a little further to the east. The applicant is requesting a special use permit for a dog boarding facility for a maximum of 40 dogs. Carson City Municipal Code defines a kennel as a place where 10 or more dogs of not less than 6 months of age are kept, harbored, boarded, or maintained at any given time. And dog boarding facilities are allowed in the retail commercial zoning district, subject to approval of a special use permit. So this aerial gives you an overview of the uses in the area. The subject parcel is outlined in orange and is located on the frontage road just south of the Dodge dealership. While the parcels in the area have commercial zoning, the parcels immediately south and east of the subject parcel also contain residential uses. The parcel immediately south of the subject parcel is labeled as the Security First House of Drake parcel here on the slide. It contains a retail business and residence at the front of the property and a duplex at the rear. And these residential uses are approximately 50 and 60 feet respectively from the shared property line. The so-and-so parcel is located immediately south of the Security First parcel, and it also wraps around to the rear or the east side of the subject parcel. The so-and-so parcel contains a 12-unit apartment complex in addition to retail space near the frontage road. And these buildings are approximately 120 feet from the subject property line. In addition, the so-and-so parcel contains an 8-unit mobile home park located east of the subject property. And the nearest mobile home is approximately 60 feet from the property line, with the remaining mobile homes 300 feet or more from the property line. And then just beyond the mobile home, you have the single-family residences, and these are approximately 400 feet or more from the rear property line of the proposed dog boarding facility. And then across the highway, you have a car wash and a tire center. So this aerial gives you a different perspective looking from the rear of the property. There's a 2,715 square foot building located on the site, which the applicant proposes to remodel to accommodate the dog boarding facility. The rear of the property is also where additional parking and the exercise yards for the dogs would be located. This is the site plan provided by the applicant. The proposal includes a total of 28 kennels, including 13 to 14 kennels with both indoor and outdoor areas, and the remainder of the kennels would provide indoor areas only. There will also be a small grooming facility for clients that are boarding their animals there, either overnight or for daycare. The rear of the parcel would be used for the exercise yards for the dogs, and the perimeter of the property would be fenced using a 6-foot-tall solid white vinyl fence. There are two specific concerns that are typically raised with dog boarding facilities. Those are odor and noise. In order to mitigate odors, staff has recommended a condition requiring dog waste to be picked up a minimum of 2 times daily, stored in a weather-tight covered container, and disposed of properly on a weekly basis. Additionally, the waste containers may not be located any closer than 30 feet from the north and south property lines and 100 feet from the east and west property lines. With regard to noise, staff does recognize that there could be a noise impact to neighboring properties, and therefore we have recommended several conditions of approval to help to mitigate noise. Those include limiting the time that the animals can access the outdoor areas, limiting the total number of dogs allowed to be in the play yards at any one time, requiring the use of outdoor sound blankets or acoustic blankets to be hung on the outdoor kennel areas to help reduce noise. And staff is also recommending a condition requiring the applicant incorporate materials such as acoustic baffles that would help to mitigate any noises generated from inside the building. I would note that the noise mitigations that I've included in the staff report are based on my own independent research into potential solutions to noise impacts from kennels and what other jurisdictions throughout the country are doing to mitigate noise impacts from these types of uses. I'm not an acoustic expert, but these are my best recommendations based on my research. These recommendations are not based on a noise study. We have received several letters from neighboring property owners indicating their opposition to the project because of the potential noise impacts. The letter does suggest that if the Planning Commission approves the special use permit, a condition be incorporated requiring a noise study be conducted and mitigations called for in the noise study be implemented and maintained throughout the life of the project. And we can discuss that further if that's something the commission wants to consider. We do have a couple of proposed changes to the conditions. After further discussions with the applicant, we're recommending modifications to 3 conditions. Condition 7 is being deleted based on the Carson City Fire Marshal's discussion with the state fire marshal regarding the interpretation of this requirement. Based on the information presented by the applicant, the city's fire marshal has indicated that condition 7 is not a requirement and should be deleted from the conditions. And because of that, condition 15 would no longer be necessary. With regard to condition 27, the applicant has requested a 12-hour block of time to allow animals out for exercise. And after further consideration, the request does seem reasonable to staff, and we're therefore recommending modifying condition 27 to allow for a 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Outdoor use. And that is mostly because it's allowing the animals additional time to exercise. There are 7 findings of fact the Planning Commission must make in the affirmative in order to approve a special use permit. Staff has made all 7 findings in the affirmative and is recommending approval subject to the conditions outlined in the staff report and including the modifications that I have just reviewed. I believe finding 2 is particularly important for the project because of the potential impacts from noise and odors to neighboring properties. As we've discussed, in order to help mitigate those impacts, staff has recommended several conditions of approval. With these conditions of approval, staff feels that finding 2 can be made. I would note staff does not believe finding 2 can be met without these or similar conditions that would mitigate noise and odors. And I do want to point out that the applicant has proposed a future expansion of the business to include a metal building, additional kennels, and an indoor play yard. The applicant did not provide enough information at this point for staff to recommend approval of any future expansion. Therefore, future expansions would have to be considered under a separate special use permit process. We did receive, just prior to the meeting starting, 5 additional letters. They're all the form letter. We received them from William Gilroy, Maureen Brower, William Landry, AMC Land and Cattle, James Cryer, and Carson Dodge Chrysler, James Cryer.
So we went basically from 26 to 31 then, if my
Yes.
count is right. Great. Of the form.
Plus the one that's included in the,
Plus the one in
in the packet.
Whose phone is that?
The applicant, Chelsea Avery, is here, and she may wish to address the planning commission. With that, I'm available for questions.
A couple questions for staff. With the formula with 40 animals and a number of kennels, some of them being outside, whatever, from the limited information of expansion she gave us, that could end up being like 70 or 80 animals with the same formula being used with the expansion. Just a point to be made. Another thing is the 6-foot fence all around. There's quite a few dogs can go over. I know I've owned a couple that can go over a 6-foot fence without a whole lot of effort. Not that it would happen once they were in possession of the kennel, but possibly getting away from someone, bringing them in or something, get into the neighboring areas. Just another point. And I'll reserve other comments for after more discussion.
I have a question for staff. On condition 7, does that mean that commercial facilities such as a kennel don't require any kind of alarm system? Or
That means in this particular situation, the fire marshal determined, based on his discussions with the state fire marshal, that that requirement did not apply to boarding facilities such as this.
But it's also going to have some commercial uses within the facility, if I'm reading this application correctly. I would like you to have the fire department check on that again.
That's one of those conditions, that Lee Plummer, Community Development Director, I mean, that's certainly one of those conditions where in a building permit under construction, they have to comply with the fire code at the time of construction. So that's something that would be looked at, certainly, and I'm sure it was considered the occupancy of the building for this use.
Why then are you eliminating that condition? I mean, if it's going to be required, if it may be required.
Because if it's in here and it's not required by the code, it shouldn't be in here.
Well, you could put it in, you could do condition 7 rather than eliminating it. You could put in that subject to the building code. Installation of those items subject to the building code.
I mean, we're just kind of having the side discussion. This is the debate we always have, these are not construction plans that have been submitted to the fire department, so they have comments kind of making some assumptions at the time and and what we try to have them do is to flag certain things that are maybe out of the ordinary, like with the last one. If access is clearly inadequate and they're going to have to design the project, we need to know that. But just to say all the access requirements for the fire department in the special use permit is not necessary. And in fact, might be counterproductive because what they have to do is actually comply based on what they submit with the code at the time that they submit. So yeah, you could delete this, and if they're required when they come in for a building permit, they're going to be required to do it. You can leave it in here, and if they're not, and you can note that, then it's not. So your suggested way of saying it would do the same thing.
Well, and the fire department's letter states it must comply with all these different regulations, so it will have to comply to go forward.
Well, I don't disagree. I'm just wondering why you're eliminating it when they may have to comply anyway. But I'm not going to argue it any further. I had one other, a comment on 27. By changing the hours, if the residents of the neighborhood to the east of this project are anything like me, in the summertime, they like to go outside and sit in the backyard. And, if you're out there eating dinner at 6:30 and you've got dogs barking, it somewhat reduces your enjoyment of your property. So I would suggest that we keep the evening hour at 5 p.m.
And also even in the morning time, I mean, it's 8 to 5 is when you're probably going to be at work. And so that solves the problem for them. It doesn't solve the problem for the car dealership, but they will be at work at that time. But I agree with you. I don't think it should continue on past 5 o'clock if it's there.
Commissioner Dors for the record. In regards to that condition number 27, is there any, for the kennels that share outdoor space and indoor space, is there any sort of, maybe this would be a better question for the applicant, but is there anything stopping the dogs from going out in the middle of the night to the outside? Are they contained inside?
So the way that the condition is written, it would prohibit them from using the outdoor kennels.
My apologies, I just missed that. All right, and then on the condition number 29, it is worded as such that it'll be, the blankets shall be hung on the outdoor kennel areas to help reduce noise. What does that include the yard? I mean, it kind of same question as the last one, but this one, I'm pretty sure I read it correctly. Is that just the kennels that are gonna need blankets, or are they gonna need to put that on the recreation yard too?
The way it's written is just the kennels. We could consider expanding that to the fence that is the perimeter of the property as well.
I think we should definitely consider doing that.
Mr. Chairman.
Other questions for Commissioner Board?
If you go ahead and eliminate condition 7 and condition 15 about the fire alarm and the sprinkler system, is there still a requirement for the Knox box, number 8?
I verified with the fire marshal that his only concern was condition number 7. So yes, the Knox box would be required.
Other questions for staff?
I just have a question. I don't even know how to phrase this, but condition number 30, who's going to be checking that, enforcing it? I mean,
Well, as with most special use permits, we do rely on neighboring property owners to complain if there is an issue. So if there is an issue, we would be presumably getting phone calls and then dealing with getting them in compliance.
Any other questions for staff? Would the applicant like to come forward, please? Right there's fine. There's 3 chairs.
This is my husband, Andrew.
Would
This
you
is
turn
the-
your mics on and
sorry.
as you speak, and then state your name, please, for the record?
Sure. For the record, my name is Chelsea. This is my husband,
Your
Andrew.
last name?
Avery.
Thank you.
Sorry. It's my first time doing this. It's a little intense. And then on the end here, we have Andrew, who's the landlord of the property.
First of all, do you accept the conditions of approval
Yes.
with the fact that we are intending to modify number 27 back to where it was at 8 to 5?
Yes.
Discuss that further if you like.
Yeah,
In your presentation.
Sure. Oh, okay.
Okey-doke.
Sure.
So was there anything you would like to add to the presentation that staff made or comments?
On 27? In general?
Certainly.
So let's see. So I'll just address 27 first. The reason why I asked to extend the hours was not only for exercise purposes, but it's cruel to keep a dog inside for 15 hours, which is what the original 8 to 5 is. Our dogs would be eating around 5 p.m., so they're going to have to go to the bathroom after they eat dinner, right? So that's why I asked for the extension to 7 p.m. and then once again in the morning, letting them out earlier. To address, let's see, I think you had brought up a comment about dogs being able to jump over the 6-foot fence. It is a vinyl fence, so it's a slippery surface. It's easy to clean. And in addition to that, we will have staff members outside with the dogs. It's not something any other facility has really had an issue with that I'm familiar with. I've been in the industry for a long time, so I have a lot of experience to back that up. Sure. And that would, of course, be a concern of ours, too.
Questions for applicant?
I have one.
Commissioner Borders?
In your proposed business introduction, you talk about the city of Carson City is rapidly growing and new housing is being built to accommodate 85% population jump in 2018. Could you explain that?
Yeah, that was just a simple Google search that I found on, I think it was,
But our population hasn't grown 30,000 people in this year.
that's what I read, that it was 0.85%.
Well, you have 85%.
That's a typo.
Thank you.
That is a big difference, but it's 0.85%. It's growing is the bottom line, so the more people you have, the more dogs you have, the more businesses like this you'll need to accommodate those dogs and the working people, and nobody wants to leave their dogs locked up inside while they're at work all day.
Other questions for the applicant?
I have a question. I think you bring up a good point. It is cruel to keep a dog inside for 15 hours. That being said, one of the findings of, that we are required to meet is not having a detrimental effect on surrounding property value. How can you explain how we should reconcile letting the dogs out at 7 a.m. and out until 7 p.m. with also not detrimentally affecting not just property value but quality of life
Sure.
for surrounding residents and
Sure,
that's it.
sure. So I would, if there was ever a time where there was a dog that was extra loud, we would just take them out individually. I mean, that's always an option too. They can go out one at a time. I'm not gonna have, well, I'm already limited to 7 dogs, but there might not even be 7 dogs out at a time. If they're extra rowdy, they don't get to go out, with the rest of the dogs. They go out individually. So that would be a way for me to mitigate the sound. And it's bad for our business too if we have a bunch of barking dogs. I mean, that's the last thing I want to do is have angry neighbors. And it doesn't look good for our business either, with clients coming in and having yapping dogs. It doesn't look good. So we will do everything we can to make sure that it's a properly run business like it should be.
I just, speaking from experience, et cetera, I think it's a great project. I'm just not sure of the location.
Right.
My wife has worked in a business with outside sales for the last 20-some years.
Mm-hmm.
For like 8 or 10 of those years, right next door was a doggy daycare. And the number one complaint, day in and day out, was the barking dogs from the customers, et cetera. And the problem being, and I've owned dogs my whole life. I don't have one currently, but I have owned many dogs. You get dogs that don't know each other, around each other, they bark. Even happy dogs, they bark.
Yeah.
They're dropped off, they're not sure if their owner, when they're gonna come get them back, pick them up, whatever. They're in a strange area. I just don't know how, no matter what you do, as long as there is outside kennels, or out, you could control the 7, maybe walking or bringing them in and out, how you're gonna keep the noise factor down. And as I say, this went on and on and on, to the fact they didn't do outside functions in that part or certain times because of the fact dogs just naturally bark.
Of course, yeah.
And I'm just making that statement. So I think the project is wonderful. But looking
Thank
at the surrounding homes, business, selling cars, et cetera, outside around that area, and some of your kennels are backed up right against a stone wall right next to the parts department and repair department of the auto dealership that I've used in the past. So I just think it might be an issue.
And I can definitely appreciate that. The Dodge dealership in itself, I did a kind of week study on my own, and I went there at different hours and stayed there. They make their own noise, in their service department. There's constantly cars coming in and out. And most importantly, South Carson Street, I mean, that is a busy street. It's probably 30, 40,000 cars per day. So that makes it, noisy as well. And the loudspeaker from Dodge 2 went off several times within a 30-minute period that I was there.
Commissioner Tingle.
And you may not have this information, maybe somebody from the city does, but on College Parkway, Lone Mountain Veterinarian has dog boarding. And there is a huge apartment complex right across the street. And I don't know if there's been any noise complaints from the folks in that apartment complex related to Lone Mountain Veterinarian. On Long Street, Sierra Veterinary Hospital also has dog boarding. And there is a extended stay motel as well as numerous apartments across Long Street from Sierra Veterinary Hospital. And I don't know if there's been any noise complaints related to the dog boarding at that facility. So, and I'm aware they don't have any noise mitigation equipment or anything because I walk my dog by there all the time and there's no noise mitigation. So I'm just wondering that if there's going to be a criteria that we're going to expect this young lady and her business to comply with associated with noise mitigation, then that needs to be considered across the board for any dog boarding facility. And I don't know if that requires a code change or if that's even possible, but I just feel that if those two businesses are operating without those standards in place, then I don't know that it's fair that we expect this young lady and her business to comply with those requirements. That's just my comment.
Commissioner, is there pre-accessed outside kennels at those as well? Okay, thank you. Other questions for the applicant, Commissioner Doors?
This is also more directed towards staff. Just to clarify, it is concerning to me to have 40 animals in a building and not have a fire alarm. So I just want to clarify, if I understood what you said, Lee, correctly, we cannot change that because we cannot make it a condition, period, end of story, because it perhaps goes against what would be interpreted in the code?
Can I chime in on that? Okay, so the 40 dogs, that's a very large number for us to be a small business. That would be our goal, is to get up to 40 dogs, and that's with the expansion towards the back. Now, I understand that's not a part of this special use permit, but we actually only have 28 suites inside. And how I came up with the 40 dog number is I'm assuming maybe some families have more than one dog. So that's where I came up with that number. Being a new business and a new business owner, I don't foresee us having 4 dogs until later down the road when we're able to make those expansions. And to the fire sprinkler question, there's actually a few other dog boarding facilities in Carson City that have twice the size building as we're prospecting, and they do not have fire alarms or sprinklers.
So be that as it may, it still is concerning on both,
Oh,
everything
sure,
you're saying is concerning.
sure.
But also it is our responsibility to look at full build out, just like you heard with the apartment complex. We have to look at a traffic report for if everything is built, period, and fully there. So your 40 dogs is what we're looking at. So can we make that a condition by and large?
Okay, I will answer that, but I'd like to answer Commissioner, or speak to Commissioner Tingle's comments. Actually, Heather researched kennels to determine how kennels were being treated in Carson City, because clearly, when you think about a kennel, what's the obvious thing you think about? Noise. I mean, it's just obvious. And so she wanted to see how other special use permits were handled. And I think that's kind of where your question's going. In 2013, the code was amended. Since 2013, we have not been able to find a special use permit for a kennel. Okay, so that's why we can't draw on examples. Having said that, we're in the retail commercial zoning district right now with this project. The use is allowed outright in the industrial zoning districts and in the general commercial zoning districts, which means we don't have the 7 findings of fact. So the tool we're using, the planners often talk about their toolkit, right? It's a special use permit. This special use permit means this use might be okay, but might not be okay. The staff doesn't get to issue a permit on this. If we were in the general commercial or the industrial, this exact same use would never be before you. The staff would have the authority to allow it. But because we're in the retail commercial zoning district, in adopting the code, the board said, well, this might be okay. There might be circumstances where this is okay, but there might be circumstances where it's not okay. So we're going to subject this to a public hearing so that neighbors are notified, and you can see they're here, that the Planning Commission has the opportunity to take that public testimony. And if the commission can make the 7 required findings of fact in the affirmative, including the finding of neighborhood compatibility, then yeah, it will be fine. But if you can't make those 7 findings of fact in the affirmative, the answer is going to be no.
Or if there's conditions to make.
Right, and you can't establish conditions of approval. So now we'll go to Commissioner Doerr's question. The conditions you see, I'll tell you how I do a staff report. I don't do my conditions till the end. I analyze the findings, and then when I'm done analyzing my findings, I figure out what were those mitigations that were necessary to make that finding, and then I draft my conditions. So those conditions appear at the beginning of your staff report, but it's really like the last thing we write, because we have to look at each of those findings. So can you require a fire sprinkler system? You would have to tell me what finding you're looking at that causes that mitigation to be necessary. You have 7 findings of fact, you have the staff report, and if you say, I cannot make this finding, whatever one it is, unless there's fire sprinklers, then yes, you may add that condition, because this is a discretionary review.
That's true of all conditions. I'm specifically asking, and I understand it, and yes, absolutely, fully understood. But unless I misunderstood what you were saying, Mr. Plummel, it seemed like we weren't allowed to because it sort of contradicted local code, and so it may put us in a sticky situation. So I guess I just want some clarity on that.
Okay, no, I agree with her statement. That you can add to the condition and require something that then would require a building permit. I think I was just getting, the discussion previous was just about compliance with the code, not the additional, but I think you would need to relate it to the findings in order to add a condition like that.
Any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner?
In number 29, it talks about the acoustic outdoor sound blankets. Oftentimes, though, we have requirements such as your sign can't exceed 28 feet. Would the applicant be agreeable to something along the lines like between the hours of 5 p.m. to 8 a.m., noise will not be more than 60 decibels at a fence line? Have you ever had any experience with something prescriptive like that? So from my standpoint, I don't care if you hang blankets, put up a 50-foot wall, whatever, but as a homeowner, I just want to know, am I going to hear this noise or not? I appreciate staff researching and doing all this, but at the end of the day, it might not work.
Right.
So would you be agreeable to possibly a sound study and then setting up parameters like that, where you could say, for instance, after 5 o'clock, it won't be any noisier than the traffic on Carson Street, or something to that effect?
Yeah, I would be open to that. Definitely. I actually did look into trying to find somebody that could do a sound test for us. And the gentleman kind of laughed at me because he said, you know, are you building an airport or are you building a freeway? And I said, no, a dog boarding facility. So I know those tests do exist and I wouldn't be opposed to doing something like that. My question would be, how do you do a sound test on a business that isn't already operating? They can't go to another boarding facility and use those same results for potentially our business, because we're all going to run differently. So that would be my question, is how would an appropriate, accurate sound test be achieved?
I think
So-
Lori would set parameters. I
So,
would
so
think.
yeah, we would set a condition in here that after so many days, you would have to mitigate any sound above 60 decibels or something to that
Okay.
effect. You would have 30 days to rectify this
Gotcha.
issue, or the special use permit could be revoked. So I agree. So what I'm getting at is perhaps you do a sound study that says, you know, for most residents in this area, a noise at this level would be detrimental to their health. So our permit is going to say, if we exceed this noise level, we will take mitigative action such as more blankets, more higher fencing, insulated fencing. Some of the concerns in the letters said there's other technology out there to mitigate these sounds, but at the end of the day, as a homeowner that's on the other side of the fence, who I also have a neighbor that has a dog that barks at 5 a.m.
Sure.
I'm a little sensitive to this issue. I would say that at the end of the day, it's just don't make it noisy, regardless of the steps you would have to take. But I don't know those things. I would think we would have to get some guidance and then give you an adequate time to meet that. If you have 10 dogs and you never exceed that, you might not need to mitigate a bunch because you've never exceeded that sound level. But that would be my suggestion, because same as picking up dog poo, pick it up twice a day. That's pretty prescriptive and easy to follow. But just saying put some blankets up really doesn't, we don't know the effect at the end of that. So.
Thank you. Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Other questions for the applicant? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We'll open it up for the public.
Mr. Chair, if I might, before
Oh,
you
go
get
ahead,
going
Commissioner.
with public comment, just to follow up on Commissioner Wiggins' comments, we could potentially implement a condition like that, but I would caution that any condition that results in a specific decibel level at property line would be difficult for staff to enforce. But perhaps a noise study that resulted in specific mitigations, other than what has been proposed in the staff report, would be more amenable.
Thank you.
Just for reference, I'm coming at this from the standpoint, where I work, we have facilities that make noise. And some of the requirements I've heard is at the fence line of our property, it can't be more than 85 decibels. So, and this is up in Reno Sparks area. So these things can be done. It's not unheard of. Whether it's able to in Carson City, I don't know. That's up to Lee, I guess.
Commissioner Tingle.
Well, on the same level as, the whole waste cleanup, it would be based on complaints from neighbors. So the noise would be based on the same thing. You would enforce based on complaints being made to the city for animal waste smell or
So
Noise level.
with regard to the noise, typically you have specific equipment that's required to go out and accurately measure the noise level. Whereas with animal waste, yeah, you have your built-in equipment.
I have one last question for staff, in regards to the fire thing. I was looking through conditions. Given that there are no specific standards for the development of a kennel, which you list in condition number 5, would we not have the latitude to pretty much institute whatever we want, such as a fire alarm system, and not necessarily, by the way, a sprinkler system? I'm more concerned with just the alarm system.
So again, I think going back to what Lee and Hope had talked about previously is you'd have to tie that back to the findings.
Give the finding would be meeting the definition of the specific standards set forth elsewhere in this title for such particular use. Given that there are no standards for kennels, I mean, that does that not open us up to be able to set our own standards as the commission?
No, it does not. What that condition says, or that finding says, is, for example, are they meeting the setbacks? Are they meeting the building height? Are they meeting the other rules that are applicable? What we're telling you is this is not a rule that's applicable. It could be a discretionary condition, and so that condition is just asking, okay, we have this bundle of rules they have to follow. Did they follow them? So I don't think you can use that finding.
All right, thank you. If we will open it up to the public, okay. Thank you very much. And like we said, if you weren't here earlier with the other items, if the public presents, we'd like to, quite a few of you, if you could limit it to 3 minutes. And if you agree with someone else, that's fine, let us know that. Just give us your name or whatever and sign in. And what's that? Yeah, okay.
Oh, do we need to move? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And as I say, you hit the button, and if it gets green right at the base, you know your mic's on, and if it's red, it's off. So if you'd state your name and then your concerns or whatever, let us know.
Hi, my name's Gordon Smiley. I own the L-shaped property that's that's adjacent to, that comes behind their property. And I have 25 to 30 people that live on my property at all times. And a couple of apartments are upstairs that with their windows facing that direction. And what I'm really concerned about is, I want everybody to make a living and do their thing, but I have people that are handicapped, I have a veteran, I have old people, I have a lot of different people there. And my mobile home park is only 300 feet, so the houses are a little farther away. And my question is, okay, she does all this stuff, and then it comes down and the noise is unbearable for my tenants, and they start to leave and they can't live there anymore. What's gonna happen? What am I gonna do? Am I gonna lose my business because I can't keep my apartments occupied because of the noise? And that's my biggest question. This is my livelihood. I know there's better places for that type of business to go in besides that teeny little spot between Dodge dealer and our property, and my neighbor Gene Erskine. He lives a lot closer to it. That's all I have.
Appreciate it.
Good evening, and thank you for an opportunity to express my concerns with a special use permit application. My name is Dan Knox, and I and my wife reside at 346 Springview Drive in Carson City. And to begin, I must ask that the Planning Commission deny or postpone a decision for this special use permit 19-013 for the following reasons. 1, architectural design criteria has not been submitted to address and mitigate noise transmission from barking dogs at this proposed facility. A simple hand-drawn plot plan and promises that barking dogs will not be an issue is totally unacceptable. When other projects within Carson City come before the Planning Commission, they normally submit an acoustical noise impact report from a qualified acoustical engineering firm if noise is an issue with that project. Recommendations to minimize the impact of noise on neighboring properties are normally a part of such a
Hold on for a second.
report.
Sir, can you hold for a second?
I can't get there. Throw it away.
Thank you.
No problem. Therefore, before this project can be accurately evaluated for its impact on surrounding neighbors, I believe some form of an acoustical noise analysis report and associated suggestions in noise mitigation be paramount in the decision-making process with this commission. Simple suggestions of sound blankets and baffles are just too vague to move this project to the approval stage if materials and design are not documented by professionals. The recommended conditions of approval approved by staff are insufficient in relevance to noise mitigation. Item 3 states the project will conform to city standards and requirements. Unfortunately, Carson City does not have standards and requirements that are addressed by a noise ordinance. And item 22 that requires the applicant to incorporate materials to help mitigate noise generated from within the building, it's just too vague. Helping it doesn't resolve a problem. The applicant is also required to submit materials and design for review and approval. But that statement begs the question of who or whom will oversee approval of the proposed materials and design. I believe that responsibility can only be by an experienced engineer with a strong background in acoustical design. That question leads to, does Carson City employ such a person? And if not, should the applicant be required to underwrite those costs? Without professional guidance, the impact of noise on neighboring properties should not be understated. Item 23 requires the applicant to install a 6-foot-high solid fence consistent with submitted development plans before the commission, but there are just a sketch and a picture of a white vinyl plastic fence. Because material specifications are absent, this fence might be of a type that is sold at hardware stores that are hollow. I believe the term solid is now subjective without clarification. I could guess that this proposed fence would offer very little in attenuation of sound transmission. But again, only an expert in acoustical engineering can answer that question of what materials and at what height will be required to effectively mitigate sound to an acceptable level, which, by the way, is not specified in Carson City Code. Item 28 states the applicant shall be responsible for ensuring that the total number of dogs in the play yards not to exceed 7 at any time. But there are 13 outside dog runs that are an extension of the interior kennel by means of a pass-through doggy door. The applicant only states the staff will supervise the barking of dogs in the play yard area. So again, because of vague promises, the question remains how an additional 13 dogs will be controlled for barking, and just how many full-time staff are guaranteed to be on duty to mitigate a dog barking, whether inside or out. The planning process requires conflicts to be addressed with the Carson City Municipal Code, specifically 18.02.080 5A through H. And Section 5B of the code relates to the use, peaceful enjoyment, economic value, and compatibility of the proposed project. Development engineering of the city states that they have no comment in these findings. Well, how can noise from a barking dog not be a factor with peaceful enjoyment? And is no comment a de facto response because of a lack of a city noise ordinance? I object to this response as a qualified answer to this question and grounds to deny the application. Section 5H of the code refers to adequate information. The staff response is having adequate information with the plans and reports provided by the applicant. And they're stating that they were adequate for this analysis. Analysis of what? Sketches and promises that are subjective at best? I cannot disagree more with the staff recommendations. There are too many unanswered questions that remain, and I proposed if the commission goes forward, it would be to postpone a formal decision based on additional submitted formal design criteria from engineers in the business of noise analysis and its mitigation. Common sense can go a long way if it's properly utilized. I believe an experienced architect with outside consulting could bring this project to a successful outcome, but the applicant must be serious with resolving issues of noise. And I would welcome the applicant to respond if they wish to my testimony before the commission members before they vote on this noise. I'm hoping that the outcome would be positive, and possibly further commitments to the project could be fruitful in the decision-making process by the applicant. Lastly, if this project should be approved as currently proposed, noise complaints would most likely be adjudicated in the courts. NRS 40.140 defines a nuisance as anything which is injurious to health or indecent and offensive to the senses, and or an obstruction to the free use of property so as to interfere with the comfortable enjoyment of life and property. Therefore, I firmly believe the applicant should be wise to consider at least the appearance of appeasement to neighbors by taking the steps of enlisting professional resources to mitigate noise before the fact rather than afterward. Thank you.
My name is Diane Jones. I live at 3130 Parkview Drive, which is adjacent to this property where the proposed project is. I just want to talk about noise. Barking dogs create noise between 80 and 90 decibels. Jackhammers register the same at 90 decibels. In kennel situations, the noise level can reach 115 decibels. OSHA itself requires sound protection for workers at 85 decibels. This is an 85 or more decibel situation. This level of noise is detrimental to health. At 85 decibels, hearing damage in the ear begins. High noise levels are linked to lowered productivity, decreased communication skills, insomnia and other sleep disorders, anxiety, heart arrhythmias, gastrointestinal problems, and more. A barking dog sets off our autonomic nervous system. That's the one that tells you there is trouble. If it continues, the nervous system stays in that state. And the cortisol hormones from the adrenal gland continue, and we are in trouble. We can't get back to the other part of our nervous system, the sympathetic nervous system, that operates when things are normal. It handles breathing and digestion and simple things. The brain is connected to all of our organs, and all of the organs speak to each other. The message is trouble. Body, go into emergency mode. This is an enormous stressor on the physical body, even for just a few minutes. How have you felt when you've walked into a kennel, an animal shelter, or even your own veterinarian's office? Imagine 24 hours a day, no days off. We cannot live without restful sleep. When you must sandwich your sleep between barking outbursts, you may be in bed for 8 hours, but only get 3 hours of restful sleep. You go to bed stressed from the barking during the day, and you wake up exhausted from poor and insufficient sleep. You're unable to function at your best, or even at your sort of best. There is no relaxation in the barking zone. Sex in the land of the howling hound? Not unless you find it arousing to make love in a kennel. If you work at home, your daytime is like your nighttime. It's impossible to focus and find the needed deep concentration for your work with barking in the background. There has never been a movie made that had constant, continuous barking in the movie. Imagine having to live with it. That would be your movie. Imagine just one dog inside of a theater barking. It's happened to me at Fandango. How can you concentrate? If you have a little one who makes noise, who wakes because of noise, and has trouble getting back to sleep, just shoot yourself. If you're recovering from an illness, you need rest and sleep. Where will you go if you cannot rest at home? I did a short literature review of the hearing and other medical and psychological effects of noise, speaking just from one
Ma'am,
article.
is there a lot more of this?
Sure.
We're trying to limit everybody to like 3
Okay.
minutes, so we aren't here till 10 or 11 o'clock tonight.
It's noisy and it can kill
If you
you.
could just wrap it up, please. I mean, we're kind of going to some areas I don't think we really need to go into. But we
Those of us
understand that
nearby,
noise is a problem.
the proposed kennel find ourselves in a perfect storm. A zoning issue that needs a rethink and the lack of a noise ordinance. Thank you for your time.
I won't take much of your time, if my radio shuts up. I own the property adjacent to this dog farm, barn, whatever, and I've been there since 1992, and 2 years ago, that location was a gun store. And when that was a gun store, the owner and the guy that owned the gun store had 2 dogs. And those 2 dogs like to drove us crazy. 2 dogs. They would bark at the gate. They would bark. They would, and what are you going to do? So, one of my tenants, I have a duplex in the very back of the property, and one of my tenants was 75 years old, and she drove her car. Well, she went up to try to talk to the owner to ask him if he would watch the dog while she got it to her house. And so they didn't hit it off, so she starts down the driveway, and that dog is on the other side of the fence, so he couldn't hurt her, but scare the hell out of her. So that dog starts barking and growling and chase, and that 75-year-old lady run 200 feet down to her duplex, went in, closed the door, and the next thing I know, it was the following day, she said, I found another place to live, and I'd like to get my deposit and my rent back. Now, that's just one instant, and I can repeat, because animal control came over there 5 different times.
So that was a previous experience there. It really doesn't affect this application.
That's
So we
correct.
understand, so thank you.
Yeah.
Will you state your name?
Pardon?
Will you state your name?
State your name, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Gene Erskine,
Thank you.
Gene, Erskine.
Thank you, sir.
So anyhow, I just want to say that we sent in 40 signed forms.
Sir, we
from
received those, okay?
40.
Okay.
And the Millstream Hotel was there. The
Sir,
Dodge,
we
the
received
Jeep
all those,
and
sir.
Dodge car dealer were there. They're all against. And the biggest problem is where the dog run is where all of the technicians from the car dealership work on the final prep on cars before they send them out.
That, sir, we brought
So-
that up in our evaluation.
Yes, so I'm only saying that there's a lot of empty dirt in other places around here that probably would be tickled to death to get the dogs.
Great, thank you for your input.
And that's it. So, yeah.
As you're finished speaking, you folks can make room for others to come up and speak.
Okay, I finished. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name's William Bright. I live at the apartment buildings right next door to where this proposal is being set up. I live on the second floor. Both my windows of my apartment face that direction of where it's going to be. And so the noise is going to be a major problem for me living there. I'm retired, living on Social Security. I'm also a Vietnam veteran, and I can't afford to relocate on my income. I'm living on Social Security. But the topic was brought up about the traffic in Carson. Well, I lived there before they opened up the new freeway adjacent, and now you can actually walk across the street on Carson Boulevard now without getting hit by traffic. Okay. And that's one issue there that was brought up. And the noise factor at the Dodge dealership, again, my apartment windows face that way. Well, they stopped working at 5:30. So after 5:30, there's no more noise. And the fact, being, I'm nervous, okay.
Can't be, you've been shot at.
It was easier, at least I had somewhere to hide. But as the noise, how do you stop a dog from barking? You can't. If one dog starts barking, they all go off. And trying to separate them is not going to work. I mean, if they want to soundproof the building, fine. We'll make it up to the second floor above my apartment windows, and then I won't hear it. Because that noise is going to rebarb off the walls and come over those walls. Just like, and so that's not going to solve the problem as far as where I live. And then it comes to sleep. Okay, I sleep. I'm retired, so I sleep. And I don't necessarily sleep during the night hours all the time. And so I sleep during the day. I take a nap. I'm an old man, so that's one of the things. And like I said, I'm 100 feet from the fence line, and then another 30 feet to the dogs' kennels. That's not very far. And so I'm gonna be affected by that a great deal. And like I said, I can't afford to move. I'm in that low housing that she was talking about, that I need to have a low housing. And I just don't have the I'm sorry, I suffer from PTSD, and I get very anxious at times, so.
Well, again, sir, thank you for your
But
service.
that's what I'm trying to say. I won't be able to live there with my medical conditions if that happens, and I don't know when I'll be going to, so thank you for letting me
Thank you,
share.
sir.
This is Maureen Brower, and I think you've already received my letter of opposition. In view of all the testimony already given, I thank the people that spoke before me so that I don't have to repeat it. Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Lydia Sitman, and I live in the residential area that is a couple streets back behind. I'm going to be on the other side that I'm totally for this instead of everybody being against it. I don't know how you can do a sound test with dogs. I live in a neighborhood where there are dogs, and guess what? They bark in my neighborhood too. It's something that we deal with. I don't see people that own a business that have to do with dogs are gonna stand back and let dogs just bark all the time and make everybody upset. So I just wanted to just say that I am for this. You just had 2-hour conversation about a whole lot of apartment complexes that you're putting in right down the street. People need a place to take their dogs. For those of us that care about our dogs, maybe we have to go out of town and we need a place to keep them, kennels or where we need to go. So I just wanted to go on record that I am for this. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good evening, I guess it is. My name is Lori DeChristina, and I live at Somerset Drive, which is directly behind this kennel, this facility as well. And I also want to show my support, because when I saw the letter come out to us from the planning division, I was thrilled to see that we're going to be getting an animal shelter this end of town. There's several grooming and boarding and daycare centers north of town, but there's nothing on the south end of town. And like was said, with the new buildings coming in, people are going to need places to take their dogs for daycare, for grooming, whatever it may be. And I highly support this procedure or this venture. The part of the whole fire description or the fire thing, they're going to have somebody staying with the dog at night. That gives me great comfort. There's a lot of boarding places that do not have a person staying with the dogs at night. That was one of the things I loved about this place. There's also, and I know I'm falling on deaf ears, but the 7 to 7, I'm a working person. I have to drop off my dog first thing in the morning, so 7 o'clock would be great. I work until 5:30. By the time I get out of work, it might be 6 o'clock. So I would love the 7 to 7 hours as well. And let's see, what else was there? And the last thing is noise. I mean, everybody's talked about noise. I have lived back there for 6 years now, and we hear the car dealership all the time on the loudspeaker. We hear noise coming from just road noise from motorcycles and stuff on it. It's just part of living in a city that we are going to have some of these sounds. And like was spoken before, dogs are going to be dogs, and we need a place for these animals to go. And so I highly give my support of this. Thank you.
More public comment?
Hello, I'm Andrew Cassels. I'm the owner of the proposed property. And Jane Erskine has been my neighbor for several years. And because of his concerns, I kicked the person out that was there previously. He was not controlling his animals. He was not listening to the neighbors. He wasn't listening to me. I ended his business. I felt that he was not a good person and shouldn't be there. It wasn't about the money, it was about the individual. I have, over the last couple of months, met and talked to these two young people expressively about their business. The last thing I wanted to see was 40 dogs in my building tearing up, chewing up, pooping up the building and the landscaping. I have visited where they used to be in the Bay Area with her experience and saw how this type of business is just not the type of kennel that dogs are running havoc, barking all day, no supervision, and in a kennel atmosphere. These are pampered dogs. They are going to have TVs, radios, things to keep them busy, toys, inside, and full-time staff and overnight staff. I am concerned too as a property owner, and I told her to go ahead and express yourself and your concerns. She did that by sending a letter out to all the recipients in the area. There was only one person that responded by email and one person that responded by letter. Somehow, this derogatory letter that somebody formulated about acoustical problems and sounds and noises formulated, and somebody had gone around and said, everybody that doesn't want to hear dogs better sign this, and that's exactly what happened. In my opinion, I don't think there's 3 things that most of these people can refer back to on this letter because they were just told loud dogs barking all day long. I am convinced that these people are trying to do a nice business for the community. It will bring community involvement. It will bring children from the community, schools from the community, educational basis for the kids and students in the area, and offer job and training for these people. I don't think it's a detriment, but a big advocate to helping our community and working class that need places for their dogs while they work or go away. I feel that it's not going to be such a detriment as everybody says. I have witnessed many times on my property, the Dodge dealership. I agree with the people that were proactive. There's lots of noise. There's lots of speakers going off all day long. There's diesel trucks going off. There's pneumatic tools going off all day long that make high decibel noises as well. So we are on a commercial street, and the commercial street has lots of noises, motorcycles, diesel trucks, emergency vehicles, etc. I feel that with talking with these young people, working with them, they're more than compliant to helping the community, listening to the neighbors, and working in an atmosphere that's going to be happy for everybody and not so detrimental. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Last chance.
This is the last chance. Okay, we'll bring it back for further discussion.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple modifications to the conditions of approval that I'd like to throw out there as possible. Modification of number 7, leave number 7 in and add to that sentence, subject to the requirements of the Carson City Building Code and applicable life safety codes. I still believe that the outdoor time should still remain between 8 and 5. And I would like to acknowledge that, dogs need to go out and can't really determine the time, but I would like to have it limited to 1 dog at a time after, outside of those hours. So it would, number 27 would read, would be an additional sentence that said that the number of dogs allowed outside of the I'm not sure exactly how to outside of the hours of 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. will be 1 dog at a time, so that you don't get multiple dogs running around outside at 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. I would suggest that we, and I agree with the property owner that, during the day, noise shouldn't be an issue in this particular neighborhood, but it's the noise levels afterwards that concern me, and I'm sure concern other property owners. So I'd like to, I don't know how you establish a noise level limit, but just throwing that out there for discussion.
In addition, I would like to add, and I said this earlier, but just to reiterate to condition 29, I'd like to either change the verbiage, I guess just change the verbiage to be all outdoor areas, not just the outdoor kennel area, as a requirement with the sound blankets.
To be hung on the perimeter fence?
Correct. Read exactly the same, but instead of hung on the outdoor kennel areas, all outdoor.
Outdoor kennel areas and perimeter fencing?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about all the perimeter of the property, but the perimeter of like the recreational area.
Right.
Right.
I have another addition to that, or a suggestion, mostly. Maybe we should require them to have, some sort of noise analysis and acoustic mitigation program established so that we have some basis for determining whether or not the noise is going to be a problem. I had actually considered recommending continuation of this item until a noise analysis and acoustic mitigation design have been prepared.
Surprisingly is that usually I'm a big proponent for business. And on this one right here, I'm really torn. And one of the reasons I'm really torn is that I managed a property up in Reno that was an indoor daycare for a dog daycare. And there were no outdoor areas. It was primarily indoor area. We were unable to lease the space on either side of the daycare for dogs even inside because of the noise that went through. And this was new construction that had been done in the 2000s. So and they actually had adjacent firewalls, but it still traveled. So that's a concern for me. Especially considering that some of the people that are living here have residences that are over 2 stories high, and I'm going to assume that there is not a lot of air conditioning. They may be using like window air conditionings and things like that. They don't have a regular central air. And so their windows would need to be opened in the summer. I myself don't have any pets, and I have to tell you, it's when I go out on my deck in the evenings and I have one little barking dog, and it's just one. But that little barking dog, I hate that dog. And I could tell the other day it was spring. And so I look at this and I think, okay, if this was not a situation where there was not residents that were right there, if this was not a situation where they would not even be here if it was an industrial area. They would not. I know, but it's not, and that's where I'm like I said, I'm really, really torn because it's not in an industrial area. There are people that are next door. I think the other thing is though too is that I think it will affect the neighbors, and so I'm concerned. I'm concerned about noise mitigation through baffling blankets. I mean, unless you covered the whole thing in a dome, and like you said, and in this building that I had, and it was up on Mayan, a really nice building. The noise it just permeated the whole area, and you could get it out in the sidewalks. So, I'm thinking that I'm with Commissioner Eswin. I would like to continue this until we actually have more information. This is a tough one. So.
I go back to the daycare that we considered right over across the corner over here. It was a beautiful project. The people were great at what they did. It was just the wrong place for that daycare because there were 4 parking spots in front they were going to have to share with other business. It wasn't going to work. And I started the conversation that this is a great business. I agree. But if it were an industrial, there's nobody living around an industrial area. There's not a place next door that's doing business that has people outside buying cars, looking at cars, getting cars fixed with it. It's a great business, but I just don't think, I find no way to meet number 2 or 7 in the findings for this. No matter what you do, one dog barking little dog, and we all have dogs in our neighborhood, we all have owned dogs. There's just no way that this isn't going to be a problem. And I go back to the situation on Curry Street where the doggy daycare that was there for several years, and I was in and out of that property all the time because my wife worked there, and there was constant noise from that park. And that was further away than this is going to be from those apartments or anything else. So that's my problem. And we can either continue it or whatever, but I just don't see any way that with the people living around it and the businesses around it, et cetera, that it won't be detrimental to the peaceful enjoyment no matter what hours we allow them to walk out there. The other places here, both the one over here, they were there before the apartments and homes were built, pretty much. But the apartments across the way were. But Woody and them had been there for like 40 years or whatever. So anyway, it's in some of that case. But again, I can't find any way to meet 2 and 7, no matter how you shake it down.
Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Mr.
Go ahead.
Chairman, if we did in fact continue this, to what end?
Yeah.
You know, we will come back and we'll have a scientific study that says we're going to have 55 decibels at the fence line. I mean, does it solve our problem? That's what I'm asking.
Well, I think you have a better analysis of what mechanisms you can put in place to resolve the potential noise issues. You know, right now, all we think that, or we're saying in the conditions that blankets and baffles will do the job, but we don't know that. Somebody with some technical expertise in acoustic design needs to take a look at this project and say, this is what you need to do to at least have ambient noise levels outside or at the property line.
And it may just take a quick phone call to find out with 20 dogs there, there's no way to do that,
Yeah,
whatever.
I don't
But-
know.
But again, we're not going to, obviously, the applicant, I would think, would have to absorb the cost of determining that or whatever. I mean, it's just, I don't think the city has anyone that could go in there and do that study. So, again, that would be up to the applicant if that was a requirement we put on that to continue it. Again, I just go back to the right facility, wrong place is all. I have the difficulty.
I just want to go on the record as I agree with the commissioner. As a young business owner, I'm not only pro growth but pro entrepreneurship 100%. But I just and on top of it, I own a business that does loud things right next to homes, and so I'm well aware of noise abatement and what I have to do on a consistent level to keep it quiet for those neighbors. And I agree. I just don't. We've all had dogs. We board down in Carson Valley when we go places, and I'd have never stepped foot in there ever when it hasn't been just barking. And that's cool. That's what it is. But I agree. I can't, with findings 2 and 7 unable to be met. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Borders.
I would like to move that we deny SUP 19-013 based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval, or subject to being unable to make findings number 2 and 7.
I'll second that. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Sorry.
Mr. Chair, yeah, we're just before you take a break, I just want to announce.
Just to let you folks know, the final decision will be with the Board of Supervisors. It can be.
No, let me say it then. Let me say, this is the final decision
Unless
unless
it's appealed with the Board of Supervisors.
This decision can be appealed to our office to the Board of Supervisors, okay?
Okay, just wanted to make sure you were aware of that. Thank you. Thank you.
And this is the final decision unless it's appealed, yes, for the audience.
We're going to take a recess for a few minutes before we address the last item, if we can. information meeting. Moving on in the agenda. Public hearing, E4, TSM-17-005-1, for possible action, discussion and possible action to make a recommendation to the Board of Supervisors regarding a request to modify the conditions of approval of a tentative map, TSM-17-005, tentative subdivision map known as Blackstone Ranch Phase 1, located south of Robinson Street, east of North Solomon Road, and north of East Fifth Street, APN 010-041-77. Hope?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On March 16, 2017, the Board of Supervisors approved this tentative map for Blackstone Ranch Phase 1. What's before you today is to modify Condition 28. The board has considered modifications of approved projects before, so I'll just remind you that should you vote no on this modification, this project is still approved. They have an entitlement. The only thing before you is whether or not to change this one condition. What the condition says is that the improvements that were associated with the conditional letter of map revision these improvements need to be done as part of this subdivision project. The CLOMAR, it's the conditional letter of map revision is CLOMAR. The CLOMAR actually included a much larger area than the area that is part of Blackstone Ranch Phase 1. The CLOMAR called for 3 ditches to be constructed. The Kings Canyon Flood Control Channel, the Ash Canyon flood conveyance channel, and the Vissy flood conveyance channel. The Ash Canyon and the Kings Canyon flood conveyance channels will benefit this project. The VC flood conveyance channel, it's getting late, I can't talk anymore, is off-site. It's actually northeast of the subject property. And the owner of that property has agreed that he will build that channel when he goes to develop that land. So in concept, the staff is supportive of what the applicant is requesting, which is essentially, rather than this applicant building all 3 channels, including one which is off-site and doesn't benefit the property, he will build 2 channels. We are supportive of that. But we're not supportive of the language that they put forward, because the language that they put forward didn't identify who would be responsible for the construction of the VC channel, what that timing would be. So the staff has prepared wording in Condition of Approval 28, which identifies that the obligation will be at the time of development of the properties north of the Ash Canyon flood conveyance or channel. And it identifies the APN. We also recommend a deed restriction be recorded so that should the ownership change of those properties, any future owner is aware of this obligation to construct this improvement. We're also recommending adding wording regarding the project must fund and file a letter of map revision to FEMA once the channel improvements are completed and accepted by Carson City, and that must occur prior to recordation of the final map. The applicant, Ken Anderson, who's representing, he's with Odyssey Engineering, and there's some folks from Ryder Home. They're the applicants on this project. Both Ryder Homes and Josh Meyer, who represents the owner of the other property that's not Blackstone Ranch Phase 1, have agreed to the staff's recommended language. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
So none of the Blackstone property is affected at all by the Vinci Channel then, correct?
Correct.
Hope? What was the logic that we used when we looked at this tentative map and decided to include the VC channel in it?
At that time, this was the very first project to come in as part of the Lampa Ranch Specific Plan. And when the specific plan was adopted, I believe it was in 2016, it did not include a phasing plan that addressed the phasing of all the infrastructure. So the staff was working with, primarily with Blackstone Development Corporation on the phasing plan and identifying, how will the transportation network work? How will roads work? How will the sewer work? How will the whole stormwater system work? Because by virtue of it being a specific plan, it's supposed to have an integrated system, and we're not supposed to look at it section by section. Since this was the first project that came in, all of those conditions, if you will, that were really associated with the specific plan area, we put them on this project. And we said, okay, you're responsible for these improvements. So now that they're actually in the process of getting outside agency approvals, like from the Army Corps of Engineers and so on and so forth, and they're actually getting ready to build it, they're like, well, wait a second. That's like over there. It doesn't even affect our property, and it doesn't really make sense because the Army Corps is not going to understand what the development is. And it's going to make sense to develop that ditch when that land develops, which in retrospect makes a lot of sense. But at the time, what we were doing was looking at the specific plan in its totality. And since this was the first project, we were front loading a lot of the improvements.
Stephen Potato, Development Engineering. Another factor to add to that is that at that point, not as much of the flood modeling had been done, which revealed that the two kind of flood zones that you can see on the flood map can be isolated from each other. As far as building the ones to the south, you're not going to have that flood zone just move south and affect the property in question.
Other questions for staff? Commissioner Esser.
It's not a question, it's just a observation and a comment. It would have been helpful to have a map showing the improvements that had been originally required, and then one showing the ones that they were proposing to install. It was very hard to understand the rationale and the reasoning behind this without those maps.
Other questions for staff? I'd like to make note, too, that we had received some late material from Charles Robinson, including some pictures of his property, et cetera, and something in opposition to this from, anyway, just wanted to make a note that that had been received by the commission. The applicant would like to come forward, please.
Ken Anderson, Odyssey Engineering.
Ken, first of all, you're okay with the wording of 28A and B now, the way it is written?
Yes, we confirmed with both property owners.
Wonderful. Anything you'd like to add to the presentation, or?
No, at this time, I have no presentation. I'm just
Good.
more here to answer questions if
No
needed.
problem. Any questions for the applicant?
I have.
Commissioner Tingle?
Favorite topic of mine, water table, groundwater table. Are there any issues with that area? I've lived here like all my life so far. And I see a lot of issues with standing water. And I live behind the North Carson Walmart, and I have 2 sump pumps underneath my house that run. And it's always great fun to listen to it kick on about 2 in the morning. After the barking dogs and my howling wolf. I mean, so I just, whenever any thought is given to developing areas that have standing water on a consistent basis, I always wonder about that water issue. And if you're doing slab on grade, I think you're still going to have some issues with ground settling and shifting and changing and cracking your floor. So I just think that, and even if you do those 2 channels, that is still not going to mitigate that groundwater seepage that comes up. So I just, that's my concern, and, that is a pet thing of mine, unfortunately.
In answer to that, with the design of the channels, the Ash Canyon channel, which is north, roughly along Robinson Street, paralleling Robinson Street, is going to be approximately about 4 feet, deep from its existing grade as it stands right now. What we're going to be required to do on top of that is, based on what would be the 100-year storm water surface elevation in the channel, the minimum pad elevation, finished floor elevation of any home is going to be required to be 2 feet above the flood elevation at the highest point of that house pad. So those channels, when they're full based on a 100-year storm, those homes are technically, where you're standing in your house is going to be at a minimum 2 feet higher. With that said, based on the design of the tentative map, and in order to get grading, drainage, and sewer to work through the site, there's areas of the site that has fill of upwards of 5 feet from its existing grade. So there's homes well above the 2 foot requirement. And I mean, we did have a geotech report done. I don't recall the exact numbers. I mean, obviously, groundwater levels fluctuate. At the time of the geotechnical report, the groundwater levels were not high through the site, meaning there were areas of 6 to 7 feet deep. And I don't recall every depth, obviously, but they were not as high at that time. But again, it's dependent on winters.
And Corps of Engineers and FEMA were all involved in this originally, right, to begin with? Or?
We're currently in the permitting process with the Corps in order to construct the channels. The Clomar has been approved. That's how we're basing our design and the channel, and that's how the channels were designed.
Other questions for the applicant? Thank you. Seeing none, we'll bring it back for discussion or oh, wait, we need public comment. Thank you. Thank you. Any public comment on this? Please feel free to come forward, state your name for us.
Hi, my name is Charles Robinson. I appreciate the board looking at the photos that I've submitted. I'm the homeowner of 1508 Pinto Court, which is straight across from the LDS Church, right there on Salomon. And since approximately mid-January, I've had to get sump pumps and have been pumping water out of the crawl space of my house. At one point, I was pumping approximately 40 gallons per hour from the crawl space of my house. So my concern with this was both pushing the buildup of this without all of the flood control, because in the packet, I couldn't tell which of the three they were talking about eliminating. That was where my concern came from. So I appreciate the being discussed. So I just wanted to bring that concern about the groundwater and about moving the floodplain because of the channels not being built. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming forward, sir. Any other public comment?
I'm David Williams. I live on East 5th in those townhouses, and about 20 feet from me is a field, and as about 4 days ago, it had 6 inches of standing water on it. So my issue is not really the drain problem per se. My issue is your development itself. I know it's already approved, but I think you're making a big mistake on the traffic issue. Have you done a traffic survey in the area?
Mr. Chair, I believe that is off topic on the agenda. As you already stated, the consideration is limited to this very specific condition of approval. And so getting into other areas, I believe, would be a violation.
So you're
of
not
open
going to
meeting law.
discuss the traffic issue? You're putting 200 homes?
That would have all been discussed initially when it was approved to begin with, sir.
Which I was not given a notification on it.
Certainly. They'll be glad to speak, staff will be glad to speak with you at any time about what was done and the studies that were done or whatever.
But it looks like you're putting 400 homes or 194 lots on the development, right? And you have 2 exits and they both go on Solomon
Again,
Road?
we're off topic, sir. The staff will be more than happy to chat with you at any, call them or whatever, and they'll go over the whole thing with you.
No. Obviously, I waste my time to come in here. Thank you.
Commissioner Doors?
Mr. Chairman, I move to recommend to the Board of Supervisors approval of a modification to condition of approval number 28 of the Blackstone Ranch subdivision Phase 1 as provided for in the March 27th, 2019 staff report to the Planning Commission based on the findings and subject to the conditions of approval contained in the staff reports.
Motion from Commissioner Doors. We have a second.
I'll second.
Second from Commissioner Borders. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Moving on, F, staff report, non-action items. Lee?
Just briefly, I'll mention that items that have been heard before the Planning Commission before going to the Board of Supervisors, the appeal of the special use permit for the RV park north of Old Hot Springs Road is scheduled to go to the Board of Supervisors on April 4th. So that's, yeah, it was continued. It was on the agenda and continued to April 4th. So that's on the agenda for your information, anybody watching. For the next Planning Commission meeting, we just have a few items, should be a little bit lighter than today, I think. We have a daycare expansion on a previously approved daycare facility on Hot Springs Road, another billboard removal, and an abandonment application related to the apartments that you reviewed today. So at that next meeting, we'd probably like to start our Title 18 review, and when we'll discuss that, I mean, how we're going to do it and take pieces of it. I think, to start off with, we want to give a little bit of education on the background, the administration part of Title 18, and probably talk a little bit about NRS too, and talk about how we are authorized through the state to adopt these regulations. So we'll start that next time. That's all I have for now.
I'd like to bring something up, and I guess this is the appropriate time to do so. Late material. We always, we have late material coming in the day of the meeting, day before the meeting, whatever. It often, and I know it's difficult for staff or whatever, and I don't know how it's set up in our bylaws or whatever, but I think to do it justice, to be able to get it and print it and read it and et cetera, is there any way, or maybe it's in there already, that we could say no late material after Monday at 5 when the meeting's on a Wednesday or something like that, or Monday at noon? Or
Well, what we could do, and we've done something similar before, it's not, people are allowed to submit late material right up to the meeting. We can't literally stop people from submitting material. However, we could, if, for your purpose, we can say, if you want the planning commission to get it before the meeting, here's the cutoff, because after this time, they can't get it. We've done that before, so I think.
I think that would be sufficient, and as I say, as much to be able to, not only staff having to get it out to us in the last minute, whatever, just may have a disclaimer that it may not be read or handled properly if they don't get it to us by a certain time or whatever for staff to handle and get to us. Just a thought.
Just real quick, I know this meeting, we were very deliberate to only give you late material at a single point in time, and it should have been 2:00 yesterday. And you should have received it all at once. And I guess you can let me know if that, because it felt like it kept dribbling in and dribbling in and dribbling in, and we wanted to stop that. So we will try to get it to you at least the day before the meeting, so you have the night before the meeting and the entire day of the meeting to review it, and to give it to you in a batch as opposed to in bits and pieces. And we'll try to work with our applicants and members of the public to make it in that batch. But this time we were really deliberate to send it out at
And
2 o'clock.
I'm not indicating staff at all. I'm just saying that I just think maybe letting the public know would be the main thing on that.
Can we put a sentence or two in the, I know we notice all these people because they're property owners.
We'll check that.
I just
There
wanted
might-
to.
I think there might be, but
We can
we'll,
put it
that's where
in.
we would put it. That's where
Yeah.
we would recommend to them to get
And it might
comments
be,
by certain
you know, another thing, they could print the letter once, couldn't they? And then just have everybody sign a sheet that they've read the letter rather than getting 40 copies.
That was the same guy from the last one, from the same, which I mean, hey,
It would save him a lot of
serves a
paper
purpose.
if he did it that way. Just have it like, you know, I registered, whatever. Any other commissioner comments or reports? Nothing else? Public comment? Seeing none, we have a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Commissioner Borders, seconded by, all in favor? Aye.